Hey guys, tonight we're taking a soft, sleepy step back in time to somewhere not so soft medieval Scotland. You're about to live through one single day in a world full of damp straw, loud geese, and locals who sharpen blades the way modern folks scroll Twitter. Imagine waking up on a lumpy pile of hay inside a smoky thatched hut, where the only warmth comes from a sheep staring directly at you like you owe it rent. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from anywhere unusual or delightfully ordinary, leave your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy caravan of ours travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up because something wet just dripped on your forehead. At first, you think it's a dream. Maybe the heavens are weeping gently onto your skin in a poetic mist. But no, it's a leak in the thatch, and it's cold, and it smells slightly like old cabbage. Welcome to your bed, which is actually straw, which is actually half rotten, and which also happens to be infested with tiny, fast-moving specks of what you really hope are just curious beetles. Your first breath is a smoky one. Not warm fireside smoky, more like choked chimney damp wool, and someone burned something unholy last night smoky. You sit up slowly to avoid displacing the family chicken, who has made herself quite at home on your hip. She does not seem to appreciate your movement. Neither does the pig in the corner. Yes, there's a pig in your house. He makes a sound that can only be translated as "don't start with me." Outside, a faint light pushes through the narrow slit in the wooden wall that qualifies as a window. It's not the sun, not exactly. It's more like a suggestion of brightness, like the sky trying and failing to overcome the constant highland fog. You grope around for your boots, which you cleverly left near the fire last night, except the fire is out, the boots are wet, and something inside one of them is alive. It leaves before you can identify it, probably for the best. The floor is dirt. Technically, it's your floor. Realistically, it's everyone's floor. Yours, the pigs, the chickens, and the parade of creeping things that come in whenever they feel like it. You step cautiously to avoid waking the other occupants. Your neighbors are likely within shouting distance. Walls in medieval Scotland aren't known for their acoustic insulation, but privacy is a modern luxury. And right now, your main concern is not stepping on something that hisses. You open the crooked wooden door, which sticks a little, and step out into what can only be described as aggressive weather. Not rain exactly, but mist with a vendetta. The ground is more soup than soil. Your feet sink in slightly with every step, like the earth itself is trying to reclaim you. A rooster shrieks from somewhere too close to your eardrum. It's not even your rooster. He just likes to roam. You blink blearily at the horizon, and that's when you see them, the village pigs, already up and rooting around in what passes for a communal yard. One of them pauses to lock eyes with you. You could swear there's judgment in that gaze. You haven't even had breakfast, and you're already being evaluated by livestock. Welcome to the social ladder of medieval Scotland. Now here's a mainstream fact to center you. The majority of people in medieval Scotland lived in rural hamlets, sharing space with animals out of both necessity and warmth. Their homes, cruck-framed cottages with thatched roofs, were poorly insulated, often smoky, due to lack of chimneys, and featured shared sleeping quarters. You didn't just sleep beside your family, you also likely shared the room with your animals, your food storage, and your dreams of one day owning more than 3 spoons. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were purely out of survival instinct or tied more closely to cultural attitudes about space and community. Some scholars claim these close quarters bred intense kinship bonds. Others argue it made murder over porridge disturbingly frequent. What we do know is privacy was rare, smoke inhalation was normal, and if you snored too loudly, your pig might judge you. As your vision clears, you notice a cart rattling in the distance. Someone's already begun the morning grind. Literally. Grains being hauled probably toward the communal mill. You're not on that duty today, thank goodness. Today, your only tasks are to stay alive. Avoid local politics, maybe barter for some dry firewood, and somehow not offend the local laird. Easy enough, right? You scratch at your arm. The flea bites are already forming a constellation. You think about naming them just for fun. That one looks like Orion. That one is definitely regret. The chicken from earlier follows you out. You decide not to question it. Maybe she's your emotional support bird now. She pecks the mud, you watch the sun pretend to rise, and for just a second, there's a fragile peace. Then the pig sneezes behind you. You sigh. Welcome to the start of your brutal, gloriously muddy day. The first rule of medieval Scottish breakfast is simple: do not get your hopes up. You won't find bread unless you made it yourself yesterday. You won't find cheese unless your goat was feeling generous last week. And you will not, under any circumstances, find coffee. What you will find is a wooden bowl filled with something grayish, steaming ominously, and loosely described as turnip gruel. It's not that people in medieval Scotland didn't appreciate a good meal. They just rarely had the ingredients, time, or temperature control to make one. And besides, food was fuel, not fun. You sit cross-legged on the dirt floor, holding a spoon that someone whittled when they were clearly angry. Around you, other villagers are doing the same, shoveling thick, lumpy paste into their mouths with a look that hovers between resignation and distant spiritual reflection. Your host hands you a bowl with a grunt. No eye contact. You nod politely and say, "Thank you." He raises an eyebrow, as if politeness is suspicious. You try the gruel. It's warm. That's the nicest thing you can say about it. It tastes like boiled root with a memory of salt. Somewhere in the bowl, there's a lump of something orange. You don't ask. The house still smells like last night's fire and unwashed wool. You glance around. No chimney, of course. Just a hole in the thatch where smoke makes its own confused exit. A chicken hops up beside you. You don't stop her from pecking your bowl. In this house, what's yours is everyone's. Here's a mainstream historical fact to digest with your turnip mush. The average medieval Scottish diet was heavy on oats, root vegetables, and whatever else the short growing season allowed. Turnips, kale leeks, and onions were staple crops, often boiled into broths or mash. Most meals were eaten with hands or shared utensils, and breakfast, if it existed, as a distinct concept, was the same as dinner, just colder. You ask whether there's any meat. Your host laughs. Not a hearty laugh, a wheezy, almost pitying laugh, like you just asked if unicorn is on the menu. He gestures vaguely toward the yard, where a cow stands very much alive and very much not about to become your sausage. The others eat in silence. You mimic their rhythm, a scoop, a chew, a stare into the middle distance. You wonder if anyone here dreams of cinnamon or toast. Probably not. That feels like an indulgence from another dimension. You scrape the last of the gruel from the bowl and hand it to a nearby child who licks it clean like a dog. Efficient. You help carry the empty bowls to a low stone basin outside. It's filled with cold rainwater and a handful of moss. That's the sink. You wash your hands in it. The water is so cold it makes your teeth ache. A neighbor approaches. He's built like a barrel and wears a tunic that may once have been green. He nods at you, then holds out a flask. You're hesitant until he smiles. It's toothy unexpected, and maybe your first friendly human interaction of the day. You take a cautious sip. The drink burns, not because it's hot, but because it's some kind of crude barley ale made in a bucket and aged in someone's memory of hygiene. Your ears warm instantly. Your host laughs again, this time more kindly, and slaps your back with enough force to jog your spine. You smile through watering eyes. Congratulations. You've passed breakfast. But before you think it's over, you're handed a cloth sack. Inside, raw turnips. Your new job. Bartering. You're told the smith's wife is short on root vegetables and long on dry kindling. That sounds like a fair trade, until you realize it means trudging through half a mile of bog. You nod, accepting your fate. That's just how things work here. No money, just mud, and mutually assured root debt. Now here's a quirky tidbit to chew on. In some regions of medieval Scotland, families marked ownership of livestock and property with hand-cut symbols burned into wooden spoons. The spoon wasn't just a tool, it was your ID. Losing your spoon meant in some cases losing your claim to your own breakfast. Imagine forgetting your iPhone and suddenly being someone else legally. That's the level of utensil identity we're talking about. Historians still argue whether breakfast customs in medieval Scotland were uniformly grim or simply practical. Some believe morning meals were sacred family moments, while others argue breakfast didn't exist at all in the way we imagine it, more of an ongoing, open-ended grazing situation. What's clear is that nobody was waking up to French toast. You sling the turnip sack over your shoulder, nod goodbye to your breakfast companions, and step back into the mist. Your chicken shadow follows again. At this point, you've stopped asking why. Maybe she's your familiar now. The path ahead is barely a path, more like a suggestion. But off you go, fueled by warm root paste mild ale and a deep desire to not insult anyone with a sword. The fog thickens as you make your way down the soggy trail sack of turnips, swinging at your side like a sad vegetal purse. You're heading toward the smith's hut, but your path veers dangerously close to the one place every villager lowers their voice to talk about the laird's residence. Calling it a castle would be generous. It's more of a large, angry-looking stone rectangle with a door that growls when the wind hits it. Moss clings to every surface as if the building is slowly being reclaimed by nature and doesn't particularly mind. A wooden pole juts out over the entrance with a flapping bit of cloth, some kind of sigil, featuring what looks like a bear wrestling a fish. You choose not to ask. As you near the outer wall, your pace slows involuntarily. Not because you're afraid, okay, yes, because you're afraid, but also because there's protocol. The laird might see you, and if he sees you, he might judge your gait, your posture, or your face. And in medieval Scotland, that could mean anything from a polite nod to being summoned for something vague and alarming, like suspicion of disrespectful eyebrows. Here's your mainstream fact to clutch for safety. Local lairds in medieval Scotland were more than just landowners. They were miniature monarchs within their own territories. They held legal authority, commanded militias, resolved disputes, and collected taxes sometimes, all while wearing the same muddy boots as their peasants. Their power was real and often enforced with an axe. So when you spot a figure on horseback near the gate, you freeze. He's dressed in layered wool and leather with a decorative brooch the size of a scone. His beard is braided possibly to intimidate enemies or just keep soup out of it. A sword hangs from his belt in a way that says, "I've used this recently." You quickly lower your eyes and bow slightly, but not too much too low. Might seem mocking. Not enough might seem defiant. There's a very specific zone of acceptable spinal curvature in medieval politics. Morning, he grunts. "Good morning, my lord." You reply carefully, adding the "my lord" as if sprinkling seasoning on a volatile stew. He eyes your sack. "Turnips." You nod. He snorts. "Barterin' or beggin'?" You panic slightly. Both sound illegal somehow. "Bartering, my lord." "For kindling." He studies you for a second longer than is comfortable, then shrugs. "Aye. Fair. Mind the bridge, it's collapsed again." And just like that, you're released. No trial by stones. No mysterious errands. Just a warning about a collapsed bridge, which is frankly the most helpful thing anyone has said to you all day. You make a mental note to name your next child after this laird, assuming you survive the next 12 hours. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Scottish lairds were known to resolve village disputes by hosting public wrestling matches or poetic insult duels. These weren't just entertainment, they were considered legitimate forms of judgment. Imagine getting sued and settling things with a roast battle. Not ideal unless you're fluent in 13th century sarcasm. Historians still argue whether lairds were genuinely respected community leaders or glorified bullies with better cloaks. Some evidence suggests they fostered a sense of identity and protection. Others claim they were opportunists who enforced loyalty through intimidation and whiskey. Either way, you tread lightly near them. Or, if you're smart, you tread elsewhere. You turn away from the laird's tower and continue your journey, heart pounding slightly from the encounter. Behind you, his horse lets out a long, judgmental snort. Horses are weirdly good at that. You cross a small wooden footbridge, partially collapsed as warned, and hop over a puddle that probably goes down to the center of the earth. You're not sure if it's raining misting or if the clouds have simply given up and started leaking. The smith's hut comes into view, smoke curling from the chimney like a sleepy serpent. You sigh in relief, shift the turnips on your shoulder, and prepare to make your trade. You're still cold, your boots are half mud by now, and your chicken companion has vanished. But you survived your first encounter with power in medieval Scotland. That counts for something. Maybe even breakfast. Part 2. Inside the smith's hut, the air changes from damp moss to dry iron and sweat. A welcome shift, if slightly overwhelming. You've made the turnip drop, received 2 bundles of kindling in exchange, and now you're waiting. The smith's wife insists you take a proper cloak before heading out again. Your current one apparently screams easy prey to bandits, wolves, or worse, rival clans. She disappears into the back room and returns with something that looks like it was woven by a spider suffering from identity issues. It's heavy dark, and once you try it on, immediately begins to itch in 3 different time zones. The wool has that unique quality found only in medieval Scottish textiles. It somehow absorbs moisture and repels comfort. Still, you thank her politely and wrap it around yourself like a contrite bat. The cloak smells faintly of smoke salt and goat ambition. It's warm, yes, but it also seems alive, as if it remembers its former sheephood and now resents your entire existence. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Scots, especially in the Highlands, were master weavers of wool, spinning it into thick cloaks, kilts, and blankets that resisted the bitter climate. These garments, often plant-dyed and hand-loomed, became symbols of clan identity. The problem: the wool wasn't processed the way it is today. No modern detergents, no softening rinses. Just raw, lanolin hand sweat and a bit of prayer. The smith's wife, meanwhile, is tying your kindling into neat bundles with a string that might once have been part of a fishing net. She offers you a flask for the road, then slaps your arm in that affectionate yet bruising way Highlanders favor. You wince bow and step back outside where the fog has turned into sideways drizzle. You readjust the cloak. It's absorbing the mist like a competitive sponge. Every movement makes it itch more. You start scratching your neck, then your shoulder, then your shin. Somehow, the cloak has reached your shin. You don't question it. Now for your quirky tidbit wool garments. In some parts of medieval Scotland, were deliberately teased with thistles to create a fuzzier surface, supposedly for warmth. The result, a fabric so scratchy that monks in the Hebrides sometimes wore it for penance. You are in this moment living a monk's punishment. Congrats. Historians still argue whether these itchy garments were tolerated out of necessity or embraced with genuine pride. Some records suggest Highlanders loved the raw texture and wore wool with the same swagger that modern folks wear designer sneakers. Others say it was a matter of survival, and people simply adapted because, well, no one likes freezing to death. You trudge forward through the village square, now nearly invisible in the mist. The cloak clings to your back like a needy ghost. A dog runs past you, 3 legs, 1 eye, twice the speed you're currently managing. A woman sells boiled eggs from under a flap of canvas, shouting something indecipherable in thick Scots. You nod like you understand. Your foot catches on a root. You stagger. The kindling nearly slips from your arm, but you recover in time to preserve both dignity and firewood. Somewhere, a bagpipe starts playing. You don't know where. You never see the piper. But the tune follows you for at least 5 minutes, echoing off the wet stones like a sonic spell designed to make you question your sanity. Back at your hut, if you can call a smoky, damp box yours, you unload the kindling with satisfaction. You've survived an errand, earned a new cloak, and impressed no one. The pig grunts. The chicken is back somehow and gives you a look that says you're late. You build the fire with trembling fingers. The kindling catches. Small mercies. You crouch near the warmth, holding your hands out like someone who hasn't touched a radiator in months, which is true. The cloak steams gently. You smell like boiled sheep. You close your eyes and consider a brief nap. But no rest for the itchy. You peel off the cloak just long enough to scratch your back with a stick. Then wrap yourself again. Then sigh. You're warm. You're mildly damp. And you're wearing something woven by people who believed comfort was for the afterlife. Welcome to medieval fashion. You're not entirely sure when the road became a suggestion and the suggestion became a dare. 1 minute, you're following a muddy path lined with gnarled apologetic trees. The next, your boot makes a sound no boot should ever make schlorp, and you're knee-deep in the world's most disapproving bog. Your mission: get to the next hamlet. They have salt. You need salt. Because without it, every turnip you eat tastes like wet sighs. The bog stretches ahead like a giant stew someone forgot to season. Fog hangs low over the waterlogged ground. Tufts of moss and reeds wave gently, almost mockingly in the wind. A wooden plank has been laid across part of the path, but it's warped, cracked, and if we're being honest, probably cursed. Still, it's your best bet. You test the plank with one foot. It holds. Mostly. You take a breath channel, your inner medieval gazelle, and step forward. Your second foot lands. The plank groans. Somewhere in the distance, a heron lifts off cawing like it just lost a bet on your survival. The pig from earlier would have turned around by now. But you're committed. Here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Scotland's terrain during the Middle Ages was often marshy and unpredictable, especially in the lowlands and along the edges of crofting communities. Bogs weren't just inconvenient, they were deadly. Travelers would frequently disappear into soft ground, sometimes feet from a visible trail. Wooden causeways or corduroy roads were used, but these degraded quickly. And now your left boot is stuck. You tug. Nothing. You tug harder. Something gurgles. You briefly consider sacrificing the boot and going full foot feral. But no, you've come too far to lose footwear now. You brace your foot against a mossy stone and heave. The boot emerges with a squelch so loud it echoes. Congratulations. You're still damp, still alive, and now slightly taller on one side. As you continue, the ground becomes spongier. Not in a pleasant marshmallow mattress way, but in a this is probably alive way. Something small scuttles past your foot, maybe a frog, maybe a bog gremlin. You choose to believe in frogs today. That's the emotional bandwidth you have. And then you see it, a man frozen mid-step, knee-deep in a neighboring pool of muck. He's a statue made of wool and despair. You freeze heart-thumping. But then he waves. Just a traveler like you. Maybe waiting for his leg to dry out enough to walk again. You wave back. Brotherhood, after all, is forged in the furnace of shared suffering and swamp socks. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some ancient bogs in Scotland have preserved entire bodies known as bog people, with remarkable detail. Hair-skin, even last meals remain intact for centuries, thanks to the anaerobic acidic conditions. Imagine future archaeologists finding your body mid-squelch, one boot on the other 10 feet behind. You'd be a museum hit. Historians still argue whether these ancient bog deaths were accidental or ceremonial. Some believe victims were executed as offerings to gods. Others say they just had bad luck with moss. Either way, bogs earned a dark mythical reputation, and for good reason. You reach a dry patch, dryish, drier than most. A miracle. A slab of rock juts out, and you cling to it like it owes you money. Your breath fogs the air. The wind picks up, whistling through the reeds like a drunken flute. You take a moment to just stand there, booted bog-streaked and vaguely heroic. You pull out a turnip from your satchel, take a bite, instantly regret it, and tuck it back. Still unsalted. Finally, the ground firms beneath your feet. You step onto grass that doesn't squish. The hamlet is just ahead. 3 houses, a crooked cart, and a cow with an opinion. You made it. Sort of. The bog didn't win. This time. Behind you, the plank gives a soft crack. You walk faster. You approach the hamlet's church, expecting quiet reverence, a soft-spoken friar, maybe even a whiff of incense. What you get is a door that groans louder than your joints, and a bell ringer who looks like he's been personally betrayed by the concept of joy. The man stands half-shrouded in shadows, hunched over a stool, tinkering with what may or may not be a mechanical rat trap. He glances up. His eyes are sharp, watery, and faintly judgmental, as if he knows you once yawned during a psalm. You don't recognize him, and yet you feel like you owe him an apology. He gestures toward the bell tower without a word. You nod also without a word, because speaking feels like a violation of the sacred grumpiness radiating from his person. You're here to inquire about salt. Someone said the church received a delivery from the coast. You assume it's stored safely inside, perhaps near the altar, in a barrel blessed for purity and trade. Instead, the bell ringer points to a sagging sack by the stairs. You peer inside. Salt, yes, but also a dried fishtail, a clump of feathers, and a bone that might have belonged to something literate. Before you can ask questions, he speaks. 10 pence or a hymn? You blink. A hymn? He nods. Whole thing. In Latin. No stuttering. You consider your options. You don't have 10 pence. You don't speak Latin. But you do remember the rough shape of a Gregorian chant from that one time you passed a monastery and listened for 5 seconds. You clear your throat and begin Dominus. Hey, Sanctifico. Something, something. The bell ringer squints at you like a man deciding whether to set his barn on fire out of principle. Then slowly, grudgingly, he nods. Good enough. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Rural Scottish churches during the Middle Ages were not grand cathedrals, but small, often one-room structures built of local stone and staffed by a rotating cast of priests, scribes, and bell ringers. The bell itself served both religious and civic functions, announcing mass marking hours and sometimes warning of raids or fires. The bell ringer, often underpaid or paid in barley, wielded surprising social power. You take your meager ration of salt, wrapped in cloth and tied with a suspiciously frayed string, and thank the bell ringer. He grunts a sound somewhere between "You're welcome" and "Don't come back." Before you leave, he gives you a final gift, a bundle of tallow candles. Payment for the hymn, he says dryly. You thank him again. You've sung a fake hymn in a language you don't know and somehow profited. That's a win in any century. Now your quirky tidbit. Some bell ringers in medieval Scotland were also part-time exorcists. That's not a joke. Their knowledge of sound ritual timing and community gossip positioned them as informal spiritual troubleshooters. If a cow wouldn't produce milk, or someone dreamed of wolves 3 nights in a row, the bell ringer might show up, swing the clapper, mutter a psalm, and slap a cross on the door. Customer Service Medieval Edition. Historians still argue whether bell ringers were respected figures or tolerated nuisances. Some were considered deeply pious. Others were known drunks who rang the bell for fun or by accident. One record mentions a bell that rang 12 times in the dead of night because the ringer fell asleep, leaning on the rope. You step outside the church, clutching your salty reward and new candles. The sky has darkened slightly, not with time, but mood. Clouds roll in like gossip thick and gray. A wind kicks up, carrying the sound of distant bleating and the occasional ominous creak. Behind you, the bell tolls once low and slow. You didn't hear anyone pull the rope. You decide not to ask. The path back to your village awaits now uphill and slick with the ambition of rain. Your cloak itches. Your boots squish. But you've got salt candles and a better-than-average story about singing your way through commerce. Not bad for someone who barely survived breakfast. Back in the village, someone shouts your name. Not your real name. Obviously, no one here can pronounce it, but the nickname they've given you newling. It's said with a mix of affection and general suspicion, like you might steal their bucket or spontaneously combust. You turn to find Mary the shepherd's daughter waving at you with a pair of rusty shears in one hand and a mildly disappointed-looking sheep in the other. You owe me, she says, jerking her chin toward the woolly prisoner. You blink. You do apparently helping her chase a runaway goat last night counts as a favor. And favors are currency in this century. So now, you're drafted into the ancient art of sheep, shearing an art you neither understand nor feel particularly qualified to perform with scissors that look like they've been used for hedge trimming and maybe amateur dentistry. You kneel beside the sheep. It gives you a slow, sideways stare, the kind of stare that implies it's read more books than you. Its body is squat, shaggy, and twitchy. Mary demonstrates grip the wool just behind the ear, pull taut snip clean. Easy. She makes it look like ballet. You try. The sheep immediately senses your incompetence and shifts its weight almost smugly. You snip too close, the wool resists, and the shears make a noise that should be reserved for haunted violins. The sheep bleats in a tone that says absolutely not and tries to sidestep you. Mary snorts. She knows a fool when she sees one. You're being bullied by livestock. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval Scots prized wool as both clothing material and currency. Shearing was essential to seasonal rhythms done by hand with large iron blades. The wool was spun and woven locally, making it one of the most important home industries in rural Scotland. Many families could measure their wealth in fleece. The sheep, sensing your hesitation, moves again. You counter by gently pressing your knee into the earth and whispering something calming like, "Please don't end me." It helps. A little. You manage to shear a small, uneven patch that looks like a map of a country that recently lost a war. Mary chuckles. We'll call that one Newlingland. The sheep's eyes narrow. You suspect she'll remember this. Now for a quirky tidbit in some Highland communities, it was believed that the first fleece of a lamb should never be cut with iron, but burned gently off with herbs to protect the animal from spirits. You consider offering this as an excuse for your poor performance, but decide the village doesn't need more reasons to call you the weird one. Historians still argue whether sheep in medieval Scotland were selectively bred for intelligence or merely the result of close living arrangements and too many stories. Some researchers claim sheep responded to names and routines. Others say they were just opportunistic fluff with good memory. What is clear? This sheep knows you're not qualified. Eventually, with Mary's help, you shear enough to fill a small sack. Your arms are scratched, your knees muddy, your pride in tatters, but the wool is soft, pale, and valuable. She hands you the sack and slaps your back. You're not hopeless, just mildly doomed. You thank her, still uncertain if that was a compliment. The sheep walks off unbothered tufts of wool, fluttering behind her like trophies. You swear she's smirking. As you trudge away, the sack of wool over your shoulder, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in a rain puddle, wild hair, muddy face, and a smear of something you hope is just sheep grease. You look like a character in a folk tale no one finishes telling. And you think, you've had worse mornings. You're cold, sore, slightly sheep-scented, and in desperate need of something warm, preferably liquid, possibly fermented. As the sun droops low like a sulky candle behind the hills, you find your way to the village alehouse. It's less of a pub and more of a large wooden shed with ambition. The roof sags. The air inside does too. The door creaks open like it's being paid to add drama. Inside, the glow of a single hearth casts flickering shadows over faces that look like they've been carved from turnips and bad sleep. You step in, shake the mist from your shoulders, and instantly feel 12 pairs of eyes assess your sole boots and dental prospects. You shuffle to the corner, pretending you're confident. A barmaid slaps down a cracked mug in front of you before you even speak. Newling gets the dregs, she says, smirking. You nod, as is tradition. The ale is lukewarm, suspiciously cloudy, and contains a floating object you hope is a spice and not an insect. You sip. It burns slightly, but does the job like liquid sarcasm. Warmth spreads through your chest, or maybe that's just the early onset of regret. You glance around. A game of knucklebones is in progress by the fire. A man with only one eyebrow is playing a flute very poorly. And across the room, someone catches your eye. She's seated by herself, carving something into a hunk of wood, with a focus that suggests it has deeply offended her. Her hair's tied back with a piece of twine, her boots are muddy, and there's a look on her face like she could fix your roof and steal your lunch. You decide unwisely to flirt. You cross the room casually, or as casually as someone with wool-mangled hair and flea bites in questionable places can manage. You clear your throat. Nice. Wood. She blinks. Slowly. I mean the carving you add, correcting the worst pickup line of the century. She squints at you. Are you trying to court me or insult my carpentry? You chuckle nervously. Ideally, neither she sets the carving down. It's a spoon. A very threatening spoon. You owe me a drink for that sentence. You rush to comply. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Alehouses in medieval Scotland were vital social hubs, especially in small communities. Often run by widows or single women, they doubled as spaces for trade, storytelling, matchmaking, and dispute resolution. The ale itself was brewed locally, typically low in alcohol, but high in mystery. You return with 2 mugs. She accepts hers without comment sips, then raises an eyebrow. Still interested, depends, you say. Do you name your spoons? She laughs short-sharp, but not unkind. Only the ones that win fights. Progress. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some parts of medieval Scotland, men attempting to court women would present them with carved wooden spoons or pins. If the woman accepted and wore or used the gift, it was considered a sign of interest. If she threw it into the hearth, not so much. You pull out the wool scrap you sheared earlier. I made this today. Well, sort of. She inspects it, shrugs. Looks like a ferret had a crisis. You grin. She didn't throw it in the fire. That's basically a proposal. Historians still argue whether courtship customs in the Highlands were formalized rituals or chaotic dances of chance. Some accounts describe strict chaperoning and dowry negotiations. Others paint a picture of bold women and practical arrangements based on survival weather and mutual sass. The alehouse grows louder as night deepens. Someone starts singing about a goat that betrayed his clan. Someone else is dancing with a broom. You stay at the table talking to the spoon carver about things you don't understand, but want of fishing knots kelp uses, and how to throw a rock just right to scare off bandits without causing war. You're not in love. Not yet. But you're not alone either. That's something. The next morning begins like a medieval hangover, should with smoke in your eyes, straw in your hair, and the faint suspicion that you've offended someone with mystical connections. You stumble out of the alehouse, your head throbbing to the beat of last night's flute solo, and make your way to the village well. Water helps. Bread helps more. Neither solves the deeper problem, the stare you receive from the old woman perched on a nearby stone wall. She's small, bundled in so many layers, she looks like laundry with opinions. Her hair is wild, her eyes sharper than a fresh sickle. She watches you like you're a loose thread in the fabric of fate, and she's deciding whether to tug. You nod politely. Morning. She doesn't reply, just spits into the dirt and draws a symbol with her toe. You've heard whispers about her. Lives on the edge of the woods. Never ages. Talks to crows. Once turned a man's voice into frog sounds for calling her granny. You try to walk past. She hisses. Not dramatically, more like she's trying to stop a cat fight in another realm. She points to your neck. You touch it. There's a rash probably from that wool cloak. Or maybe a mark. She mutters something that sounds suspiciously like an herbal recipe or a doom poem. Then abruptly, she plucks a leaf from her basket and shoves it into your hand. You chew, or shadows stay. Then she walks away. You blink. Then look at the leaf. It smells like burned time and regret. Here's your mainstream historical fact belief in witches and local healers was widespread in medieval Scotland, especially in the Highlands. Women, usually older, were both revered and feared for their knowledge of herbs, midwifery, and folk magic. Many walked a fine line between community healer and potential scapegoat. You chew the leaf. It's bitter. Your tongue goes a bit numb. You panic briefly, but your vision doesn't blur, and you don't turn into a toad. So, progress. Later you ask the barmaid about the woman. She likes you, she says. She gave you the chewing herb, not the burning one. Reassuring. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some witches, or cunning women, in medieval Scotland used coded bundles of herbs as silent communication. Chew meant protection. Burn meant cleansing. Bury meant, well, let's not worry about that one. Historians still argue whether these women wielded real social power or merely existed at the mercy of rumor and seasonal moods. Some records show them as vital members of rural life, midwives, advisors, even mediators. Others reveal trials, drownings, and tragic ends born from fear and crop failure. That afternoon, you spot the old woman again. She's feeding scraps to a raven that's clearly her tax accountant. You raise your hand in greeting. She doesn't smile, but she nods once. You take it as a truce. Back at the hut, the pig ignores you. The chicken perches proudly on your kindling stack, and your rash has stopped itching. Coincidence? You don't think so. It starts like many things in medieval Scotland, with a cabbage. You're walking to the stream, humming a tune that might be yesterday's flute song, or just the sound of your brain rebooting when a boy runs past you, clutching something leafy and distressed. He doesn't make eye contact, just barrels forward with the urgency of someone who stole something valuable and knows it. Moments later, two elderly men come into view, one red-faced and muttering, the other swinging a wooden spoon like a war mace. They stop when they see you eyes, narrowing like suspicious cats. "You seen a boy?" the red-faced one asks. You glance back. The boy is already gone, swallowed by the underbrush, and probably halfway to a different village. You nod vaguely. He had a cabbage. Both men scowl. One points his spoon at you like it's an accusation. Our cabbage. The next thing you know, you're being marched to the center of the hamlet. A crowd gathers. You try to explain you're not involved. This only makes it worse. You're now the witness, which is apparently a role that comes with obligations and cabbage-based liabilities. They seat you on a log. Two clan members, let's call them Clan Turnip and Clan Parsnip, stand on opposite sides, gesturing wildly at each other, then at you, then at the sky, as if invoking agricultural deities to smite your indecision. A man in a floppy hat officiates. He declares this a binding dispute of leafy property and says it will be settled in the usual way. You gulp. Is that combat trial by fire? interpretive dance. No, it's worse. They want you to decide who gets the cabbage. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Clan feuds in medieval Scotland were often long-running multi-generational conflicts, sparked by everything from land disputes to livestock theft to perceived insults. These feuds could be petty or brutal, or both, and often involved entire villages forced to take sides. The floppy hat man hands you a ceremonial turnip. You're to hold it while they present arguments. Clan turnip insists the cabbage grew on their land next to the flat stone that's always slightly warm. Clan parsnip argues the boy who picked it lives in their goat shed, which implies territorial cabbage rights. There are witness testimonies. There are passionate references to last year's kale incident. You consider running. But the crowd is invested now. You hold the turnip solemnly and ask if the cabbage has been cooked. They both look offended. Of course not. You suggest they share it. Gasps ripple through the crowd. The floppy hat man squints. Is that? Legal murmurs. Then someone, possibly the old bell ringer, says it's fair. The crowd nods. A decision is made. The cabbage shall be halved at sundown, roasted and eaten under supervision. You hand back the turnip. People slap your back. Someone calls you the cabbage judge. A child hands you a wilted flower as tribute. You're officially part of the social fabric now stitched in via a vegetable. Here's your quirky tidbit. There are historical accounts of village mediators who resolved minor disputes using objects like potatoes, symbolic hats, or even dead fish. These informal trials served as a release valve for social tension and were often more binding than written laws because the entire village watched, remembered, and gossiped accordingly. Historians still argue whether such rituals reflected genuine democratic traditions or were just elaborate ways to shame people into compliance. Some see them as proto-legal systems. Others think they were more about storytelling than justice. Either way, you now have cabbage court credentials. You return home slightly dazed, a hero of turnips, arbiter of leafy squabbles. The chicken regards you with new respect. The pig snorts indifferently. You sit down by the hearth, stare into the fire, and whisper, I have no idea what just happened. But deep down, you know this somewhere. Out there, a boy is still running with half a cabbage and a whole village story behind him. The next morning, you're woken not by a rooster or a pig, but by the worst possible sound in medieval Scotland knocking. Not gentle knocking. Not, hello. I brought honey knocking. No, this is the knock of authority. It's slow, rhythmic, and designed to remind you that someone important and likely unpleasant is standing on your mud-crusted threshold. You open the door and find a man in a tunic too clean for someone who lives here. He's holding a ledger the size of a horse's face and a quill that could double as a weapon. His expression says he hasn't smiled since St. Margaret was canonized. I'm here for the levy, he says, without so much as a good morning. You blink. The what? The tithe. The tax the kings, pinch the coin of burden. The, do I need to keep going? You shake your head. I don't have coin. He taps the ledger. Then let's see what else you've got. He invites himself in, which is bold for a man entering a home with a live pig and a half-feral chicken. He surveys your possessions, the wool sack, the salt, the candles, and tragically, your spoon. That's a nice spoon, he says, and writes something down. No. He raises an eyebrow. It's personal, you add. It was gifted, and it has sentimental splinters. He sighs and moves on. You offer the wool. He shrugs. We'll count it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Taxation in medieval Scotland was a tangled system of feudal obligations, church levies, and royal impositions. Most common folk paid not in money, but in goods grain, wool livestock labor hours, and occasionally obscure items like barrels of butter or dried fish bladders. The taxman might be a royal steward, a laird's scribe, or just a neighbor given temporary power and a frightening hat. This one apparently is the laird's appointed collector, which means he has the authority to demand record and judge all at once. You've used the communal path, he asks. You nod. There's a trail usage fee. You stare at him. It's a swamp. He smiles thinly. A maintained swamp. You offer more wool? He inspects the pig. No. He shrugs. Then I'll be taking the candles. You hesitate. Those were from the church witch woman. They may be blessed, or cursed, or both. You imagine the taxman lighting one and accidentally opening a portal to goat-based limbo. That might actually be justice. But you hand them over anyway. He tucks them into a satchel and makes one last mark in the ledger. One more thing, he says. You're eligible for conscription. You choke slightly. What now? Don't worry. You're in the lower bracket. Sheep defense only. You wait for him to laugh. He does not laugh. Here's your quirky tidbit. In certain regions of Scotland, men were temporarily drafted into watch duties to guard flocks roads or property lines. It was both a community duty and a punishment for tax delay. In one recorded case, a man was assigned to guard an old mill against spirits and thieves, neither of whom showed up, but he froze his toes off anyway. Historians still argue whether medieval Scottish taxation fostered a sense of communal investment or just widespread resentment. Some believe barter-based taxes encourage fairness. Others argue it opened endless doors to abuse favoritism and random confiscation of spoons. The taxman finally leaves. The pig relaxes. The chicken pecks your boot in solidarity. You sit on the hearth, mourning your candles, and wondering if you can now legally light a fire without incurring a smoke production fee. Outside, a neighbor yells something about missing turnips. You decide not to get involved. You've paid your dues. Literally. You don't remember saying you were sick. You don't feel sick. But somehow, by lunchtime, the village healer is knocking at your door with a pouch full of leeches and a grin that promises trauma. Her name is Morag. She's somewhere between 50 and 300 years old, has hands like tree bark, and speaks with a rhythm that makes everything sound like a riddle. She announces herself by entering uninvited and sniffing the air. You've got a heat in your liver, she says, before you can even say good morning. You protest. You feel fine. That's worse, she replies. Means it's hiding. She pulls out a wooden stool, a bowl that still smells of old broth, and begins preparing her instruments, which include a knife that looks like it once belonged to a pirate, a bundle of twigs, and a jar of suspiciously energetic leeches. You try to back away. She tuts. Don't be soft. The last lad bled twice a week and lived to 40. You sit, not out of agreement, but because Morag has the air of someone who could command thunderstorms. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine in Scotland was a mix of Galenic theory, folk tradition, and experimental panic. The dominant idea was humorism balancing the 4 bodily fluids: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Bloodletting was a popular treatment for nearly everything, including headaches, melancholy, and excess thinking. Morag rolls up your sleeve and slaps a leech on your arm like it's a decorative brooch. It wriggles, then latches on with surprising enthusiasm. You go pale. It's working, she says. You ask how she knows. Because you're shutting up. You're given a hot drink to steady your soul, which tastes like boiled mushrooms and vengeance. Your head swims. You may be bleeding, hallucinating, or both. The chicken watches from the corner, clearly unbothered. Morag hums while the leech does its thing. She pulls out a bone needle and some twine and offers to sew your cloak's torn hem while you're occupied. You agree mostly because you can't feel your elbow. Here's a quirky tidbit. Leeches were often named by their owners and reused, especially if they proved particularly effective. Some medieval healers kept star leeches the way modern people keep 5-star Yelp reviews. These prized parasites were believed to know where to suck and when to let go. Historians still argue whether medieval bloodletting did any real good or was simply the placebo effect plus anemia. Some claim the occasional lowering of blood pressure may have had benefit. Others point to the staggering rate of infection fainting and the fact that nobody ever just prescribed a nap. Eventually, Morag declares you sufficiently drained and plucks the bloated leech from your arm with the delicacy of a florist. She deposits it into a cloth pouch like a jewel thief securing a ruby. You'll feel better or sleep more. Same thing. She hands you a small charm twine wrapped around a pebble and tells you to keep it on your person in case your humors start acting like fools again. Then she's gone. You sit there for a moment, slightly dizzy, arms sticky, and deeply aware of the fact that you just gave blood without a sticker or cookie. You lie down on your straw bed and close your eyes. The chicken hops onto your chest and coos. You allow it. Somewhere in the distance, the bell rings again. Maybe someone else's leeches have clocked in. You exhale slowly. Your soul feels quieter. Your elbow less so. But you lived. Again, night falls like a damp wool blanket over the village. The air is thick with smoke soot and the scent of root stew that's been boiling since sunrise. You shuffle back into your hut, still a little woozy from Morag's leech therapy, and unsure whether your liver has been cured or just humiliated. Inside, the fire crackles softly. Someone's been kindling in your absence. Maybe the chicken. You wouldn't be surprised anymore. She's sitting proudly on your pillow, feathers puffed out like she owns the place. You don't argue. The pig is already asleep, snoring gently beside the hearth. You count 3 additional chickens who've entered your home since morning. One is nesting in your spare tunic. One is perched atop your stack of kindling. And one somehow has climbed onto a shelf and is eyeing your remaining turnip like it owes her money. There's no privacy, no doors, no soundproof walls, just the comforting chaos of shared space and the occasional feather drifting lazily through the air. You sigh, peel off your cloak, which immediately releases a puff of damp sheep smell, and collapse onto the straw bed. It crackles beneath you, poking your ribs in 7 different dimensions. You pull a wool scrap over your legs and close your eyes. And then the chickens start whispering. Not literally, of course, but they move soft shuffles, clucks the occasional ruffle of feathers that sounds exactly like a group of middle-aged aunts gossiping around a fire. You try to ignore it. You've slept through flute solos and cabbage court. You can sleep through this. Except the shelf chicken jumps down, right onto your hip. You yelp softly. The pig snorts. The chicken settles. You stare at the ceiling and wonder, is this intimacy or a poultry coup? Here's your mainstream historical fact in rural medieval Scotland. It was entirely normal for humans and livestock to share living quarters. Separate animal barns were rare luxuries. Chickens, pigs, goats, even calves often slept under the same roof as families for warmth, safety, and convenience. It wasn't just accepted, it was essential. A light draft slides through the thatch above, carrying with it the faint scent of peat smoke and mildew. The wind whistles through the cracks in the wood like a badly tuned flute. Outside, a dog barks, then two. Then someone yells at the dogs in Gaelic, and the village settles again. Your eyelids flutter. Then something warm and definitely alive crawls into your bedroll. You freeze. It's a kitten, tiny purring and missing part of one ear. It curls against your stomach like it's always lived there. You don't move. You're afraid of waking it, or yourself. You've reached a point where sleep is no longer a luxury, it's a moral imperative. Now for your quirky tidbit. Many Highlanders believe that sleeping near animals helped ward off evil spirits and illness. Cats in particular were thought to be guardians of dreams. Some people even whispered lullabies to their chickens, believing it soothed the soul before sleep. Others just appreciated the warmth. Historians still argue whether these intimate human-animal sleeping arrangements were hygienically disastrous or surprisingly adaptive. Some point to the spread of lice and disease. Others emphasize the psychological comfort and practical necessity. Either way, tonight, you are a living footnote. You shift slightly, adjusting your body around the animals. It's like playing a game of nocturnal Tetris, where the pieces are alive and occasionally peck you. Your breath slows. The fire pops. The kitten purrs. The chicken on your chest begins to softly cluck in what might be a lullaby or a warning. You drift off, finally surrounded by creatures who do not judge you for your wool-smelling breath or your unholy spoon collection. And for once, you think maybe this day wasn't so bad. You wake to chaos. Not the quiet kind, the kind with clucking and creaking. No, this is the clang kind. The shouting kind. The kind of chaos that only medieval Scotland can produce at dawn, complete with a man banging a ladle against a pan, like he's leading troops into battle. You sit bolt upright. The kitten is gone. The chickens have vanished. Even the pig has wisely relocated. Something is wrong. Someone pounds on your door. Again. You open it to find 3 men, each holding either a stick, a pitchfork, or a sense of righteous urgency. One points at you and announces you're summoned for kale-related crimes. You blink. What kale? You stepped on it. On Fergus's plot. During Cabbage Court. He demands recompense. I stepped on a leaf. His favorite leaf. And just like that, you are marched toward the village green for what they call a straightforward resolution. And what you're starting to suspect is legally just wrestling in mud. You ask if this is a formal trial. It's trial by combat, someone explains. You'll be fine. He's only mildly trained. You are not trained. Not in anything combat adjacent, unless flinching counts. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While not as frequent as movies suggest, trial by combat was used in medieval Scotland as a form of conflict resolution, especially in cases where evidence was scarce and both parties had strong opinions and sharp sticks. Sometimes the fights were ceremonial, sometimes they were deadly. The rules, vague. The outcomes, decided partly by skill and mostly by luck or local bias. You are handed a weapon. It's a stick, a sturdy stick, but still. Fergus appears shirtless, oiled up and glaring. He's holding what might have once been a shovel handle and is now legally a justice baton. The village gathers. Someone starts taking bets and cheese. The bell ringer is the referee. He wears a sash that says neutral, though you suspect he made it himself. The bell rings. You dodge, instinct mostly. Fergus swings. You duck, sort of. It grazes your shoulder and you yelp. You retaliate by tripping on your own foot, stumbling forward, and accidentally headbutting Fergus in the gut. He topples. The crowd gasps, then cheers. You scramble up, confused, muddy, and deeply aware you may have just won a duel by accident. The bell ringer raises your hand. Victory by belly jab. People start clapping. Someone hands you a turnip in celebration. The spoon-carving woman from the alehouse nods approvingly. You are now, for better or worse, the Kale Avenger. Here's your quirky tidbit. Local disputes in rural Scotland often turned into semi-theatrical events, especially when the community needed an excuse to break tension. Entire plays were written around feuds reenacted annually, with the original participants sometimes involved well into old age limping onto the field for tradition's sake. Historians still argue whether these combats were sincere legal tools or more of a performance for social cohesion. Some see them as embedded justice systems. Others say they were just the medieval version of reality TV, complete with commentary alliances and livestock cameos. You're bandaged lightly by Morag. She mutters something about fools with sticks and sent home with a ceremonial leek, which is either symbolic of victory or just what was lying around. Back at the hut, the pig returns. The chickens eye you with newfound respect. The kitten curls around your foot and purrs like you brought honor to the house. You sit by the fire, bruised, muddy, victorious. You defended your accidental step. You made it through trial by Kale. And you didn't even drop your spoon. You're filthy. Not the charming kind of muddy storybook. Muddy I frolicked, with goats muddy. No. This is medieval Scottish muddy. The kind that seeped into your fingernails behind your ears and somehow into the inner fold of your left elbow. You smell like boiled cabbage, peat smoke, and pride. So you do what any modern soul trapped in an ancient body would consider rational. You ask where to wash. The response is silence, then nervous laughter. Then someone mutters, "You mean a bath?" Yes, you say, a bath. Water. Soap, maybe. The laughter grows. You'll catch your death, someone warns. Or worse, ghosts. A woman gasps. A child crosses themselves with a piece of oatcake. You stare, stunned. Did you just commit a cultural crime? Here's your mainstream historical fact in medieval Scotland. Bathing was rare-feared and often associated with illness. While the Romans once embraced public baths, centuries of shifting attitudes, religious caution, and frigid climates led to the belief that bathing could open the pores and let in disease. Cleanliness was often pursued via linen underclothes changed frequently and vigorous rubbing with dry cloths or herbal powders. Water was for drinking, praying over, or surviving not lounging in. Still, you're determined. You're directed to a stream at the edge of the village where old Donald used to dunk his feet for luck. You follow the path through thickets and low-hanging branches until you reach at a stream about the width of your patience, fed by meltwater and likely colder than betrayal. You test it with a toe. It bites. You wade in anyway. Your ankles scream. Your knees try to retreat into your spine. But you keep going because you're part cabbage, part stubborn now. You splash some water on your face. It's like being slapped by snow. You scrub under your arms. A trout nearby glares at you as if you've ruined its Tuesday. Just as you start to enjoy the numbness, like your sins are being frozen off, you hear a voice. Are you dying? It's the spoon-carving woman. She's watching from a mossy rock, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. Bathing you gasp. She tilts her head. Voluntarily. Yes. She nods slowly. Weird, but brave. You take it as a compliment. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the Scottish Highlands, there were rituals involving water blessings, where people would wade into rivers on certain feast days, praying as they submerged. These weren't baths in the hygienic sense, they were spiritual resets, often accompanied by fasting or chants to ward off fairy interference. Hygiene by divine proxy. Historians still argue whether the resistance to bathing in medieval Scotland was driven more by religious taboos or practical fear. Some accounts show aristocrats building private tubs filled with warmed milk or wine. Others describe peasants who hadn't fully immersed themselves in water since baptism. You emerge from the stream, dripping, shivering, but victorious. You may not smell good, but now you smell like wet peat instead of dry peat. That's progress. Back at your hut, the chickens refuse to perch on you. The pig gives you a sniff and backs away unimpressed. You wrap yourself in a scratchy wool blanket and sit by the fire. You feel clean, possibly cursed, but clean. And for the first time in days, you don't itch. Much. It starts innocently enough: a gray sky, a cool breeze, and that faintly metallic smell that always comes before weather decides to go full drama queen. You squint up at the clouds, already suspicious. They blink back. You grab your cloak, and then it begins slow, mocking droplets that build into a torrential tantrum. The rain doesn't fall vertically. It launches sideways, like the sky's trying to slap the village across the face with wet noodles. Your cloak drinks it in like it's auditioning to become a sponge. In moments, your shoulders feel like you're hauling wet laundry uphill. Your boots squelch. Your socks squish. Your optimism evaporates. You try to help a neighbor carry firewood to their lean-to. Every log is now 10 pounds heavier and twice as slippery. You drop one. It lands in a puddle that looks ankle-deep and turns out to be a portal to Atlantis. You curse quietly. A toddler runs by barefoot, screaming with joy. Children, you note, are either immune to rain or powered by it. You attempt to take shelter under a small overhang near the blacksmith's hut. The wind laughs and redirects the rain to hit you from underneath. Physics appears to have resigned. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Scotland's famously damp climate was even less manageable in medieval times. Poor drainage, open-roofed structures, and limited waterproof materials meant that rain could ruin plans, tools, clothing, food storage, and morale. Villages would often remain partially flooded for days, and mold wasn't a problem. It was just part of the furniture. You try to salvage the situation by patching a leak in your hut's roof. You climb up, using a barrel, a slippery ladder, and something you hope isn't goat manure. Once on top, you realize the thatch is less roof and more suggestion. You attempt to reposition a bundle of reeds, only to step through a weak patch and plunge your foot into your own ceiling. Inside, the pig squeals. You squeal back. The rain, you notice, has no intention of letting up. A woman nearby walks by holding a blanket over her head. She nods solemnly. Sun's just on break. You nod back, soaked and clinging to wet straw like it's the last shred of dignity you own. Here's your quirky tidbit in medieval Scotland. Some villagers used oiled animal skins as makeshift umbrellas, goat hide hoods, and deer hide sheets, often smeared with fish oil to repel water. The smell was impressive. It worked, but it also made you detectable by nose from several fields away. Historians still argue whether rainy conditions made Scots more resilient or just more cynical. Some accounts depict laughter and games during storms. Others detail weeks of illness, ruined harvests, and muddy despair. Most agree that daily life was a soggy chess match with nature, and nature played very aggressively. Eventually, you climbed down from the roof, only mildly bruised, deeply soaked, and now with a thatch bundle tied to your wrist for safekeeping. You step inside your hut, tracking mud across what was once a cleanish floor. The pig eyes you warily. The chicken pecks at a worm wriggling across your doorstep. You consider joining. You peel off your cloak and hang it near the fire, where it steams like a miserable ghost. Then you sit cross-legged by the hearth. You pull your blanket close and stare into the flickering light as water drips rhythmically from your hair. You don't remember a time you weren't damp. You suspect this is your final form. The rain finally breaks barely. What's left behind is not sunshine, but a soggy kind of optimism. The sky turns from steel gray to just a light pewter, and the mud only sucks your boots halfway down now. You decide to stretch your legs, walk off the damp, and maybe find a better spot to dry your cloak. As you follow the edge of the woods, you hear chanting. Not angry chanting, not cabbage court chanting. This is the slow, melodic kind, men and women humming in unison, carrying staffs topped with little pouches and wooden cymbals. They walk in a line, muddy and determined eyes, fixed on some far-off point, as though it holds both redemption and dry socks. You try to step aside politely, but someone in the procession grabs your arm. You came. You blink. What, you're the newling, right? The one who won the kale duel. Yes. Then you're coming. Everyone's going to Lindisfarne. You don't know what Lindisfarne is. Before you can argue, someone hands you a walking stick. Another drapes a woven sash across your shoulders. Someone else presses a crust of bread into your palm, like it's a communion wafer. And just like that, you're part of a pilgrimage. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Pilgrimages were a central part of medieval spiritual life, including in Scotland. People would travel long distances, on foot, over treacherous terrain, to reach holy sites, believed to offer healing blessings or spiritual cleansing. Lindisfarne, a sacred island off the northeastern coast of England, was a popular destination known for its early Christian roots and its monastery's dramatic Viking history. You try to ask how far it is. 2 days, someone replies. Walking. They laugh. Obviously. You try to leave. No backsize, says a tiny old woman wearing 12 layers and wielding a bell. You sigh. The group moves forward, humming softly. The rhythm is hypnotic. A goat joins the caravan. No one questions it. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims in medieval Scotland carried tiny stones in their shoes as acts of penance. Others traveled barefoot through snow, wearing only woolen tunics to prove their devotion. A few even brought chickens to be blessed at holy wells in hopes of improving egg production. It was, in a word, eclectic. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrimages were sincerely spiritual or partially social. Some say the journey was more important than the destination, providing time for reflection and camaraderie. Others claim pilgrims went mostly to escape debts feuds or awkward kale trials. As you march with the group, someone starts telling the story of St. Cuthbert, Lindisfarne's patron. You nod, pretending you've heard it. You haven't. Apparently, he once banished sea monsters and rode an otter across a stormy inlet. You really hope that's metaphorical. By the 3rd mile, your boots have given up. Your ankles ache. Your bread has gone mysteriously missing, probably to the goat. But no one seems bothered. They share dried apples and sing a new song that may or may not involve praising mold-resistant turnips. You ask a fellow traveler why they're going. To cleanse my thoughts, he says, and find a better thatching technique. You nod. That feels valid. By dusk, the group stops near a hill. A woman lights a small fire using flint and what looks suspiciously like part of an old broom. Everyone gathers around. A pot is hung. Stew happens. You are offered a spoon. Not your spoon, but a communal one. You use it anyway. The stars emerge. Someone pulls out a fiddle. Another begins reciting a poem about wolves and betrayal. You lie back on a bed of pine needles, staring up at the sky, full of mystery meat and accidental holiness. You're not sure if this is your life now. But it's warm, and nobody has judged your socks all day. So maybe, just maybe, you needed a pilgrimage. You never make it to Lindisfarne. At around mile 23 of your accidental pilgrimage, the group detours to avoid a troublesome marsh that apparently once ate a priest whole. You don't argue. You're just happy to not lose another boot. That evening, you part ways politely with the group at a crossroads, something about a personal vow to find the driest patch of hay in the entire Highlands. They wave, sing a goodbye verse that involves turnips again, and vanish down the trail, humming like a sleepy choir. You limp back toward your village under a moonless sky. Everything aches. You smell like old wool and distant regret. You're looking forward to one thing, sleep, and you almost get it. Your straw bed welcomes you like an old friend. The pig grunts softly. The chicken snores. Yes, that's a thing now. You wrap yourself in your cloak and begin to drift off. Then you hear it, the low, steady beat of hooves. Not one, not two, many. You sit up slowly. Outside, voices hurried, angry, half-whispered, cut through the dark. You peek through a slat in the wall and spot them men, in cloaks, faces shadowed, leading off a pair of cows from your neighbor's yard. You blink. Then another voice. Leave the brown one too loud. Take the calf. You are witnessing a cattle raid. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Cattle raiding was a normalized part of Highland life well into the 17th century. Clans stole each other's livestock in nighttime raids, both as a way to assert dominance and to survive harsh seasons. While violent raids made headlines, many were quick, quiet affairs. No bloodshed, just boots and mud, and cows led off under cover of darkness. You freeze. You are not a warrior. You are a cabbage court survivor with leech marks and a spoon collection. You lay flat on the straw. A sudden clatter, someone knocks over your woodpile. You hear whispering. Too close. They're here. At your hut. You roll off your bed and hide behind the pig. She is unimpressed. The door creaks open. A figure leans in. And then the chicken explodes. Not literally, but she flaps, screams, and launches herself talon first at the intruder's face with the fury of a guardian angel made of fluff and chaos. The raider yells. The pig snorts. You lunge for a stick and swing it in the vague direction of anything moving. Chaos. The intruders retreat, one swearing about cursed livestock and another shrieking, "It clawed my eye." Footsteps retreat. Then hooves. Then silence. You breathe. Deeply. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some Highland communities, chickens were seen as natural protectors. Their sharp beaks and tendency to panic violently made them surprising but effective deterrents. Some families even placed their most aggressive hen near the entrance for feathered alarm duty. Historians still argue whether the line between survival and sanctioned theft was clearly drawn. Some records show inter-clan truces being broken over a single stolen cow. Others reveal quiet raids that went unreported in exchange for favors, marriages, or barrels of ale. You sit on the floor, heart pounding. The pig returns to sleep. The chicken hops onto your lap and preens smugly. You pet her. We're a team now. Outside, the wind returns, soft, empty. You peek out once more. The cows are still there. Some divine mercy or chicken-based justice spared them. You curl back into your bedding. You try to sleep. You do not succeed. Not for a while. Every rustle now sounds like boots. Every snort a returning raider. But slowly, under the blanket of familiar smells and shared animal heat, your eyes close. You are tired. You are unrobbed. And you owe that chicken something serious. You wake to scratching. Not your own this time. That comes later. This scratching is soft but persistent, like someone trying to carve a message into your scalp using fingernails made of existential dread. You groggily lift your head and realize two things immediately. You're covered in flea bites. Your pig has commandeered your pillow. You sit up slowly, blanket tangled around your legs like a sentient octopus. Your hair is a tangle of straw-dried sweat and possibly a twig. You scratch your arm, then your neck, then your soul. Everything itches. And the worst part, you're getting used to it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were unavoidable in medieval life. Without modern sanitation, bedding often doubled as a breeding ground for insects. People bathed, rarely changed underclothes sparingly, and slept in close quarters with humans and animals alike. Flea bites were such a common nuisance that monks, nobles, and peasants alike often carried tiny combs called knit combs on strings around their necks. You don't have a knit comb. You have a spoon and an attitude. You try to boil water over the hearth, hoping the steam will at least trick your skin into feeling clean. The pot leaks. Of course it does. You sigh and rub ashes on your ankles, like an exorcism. The door creaks open. It's the bell ringer of all people. He stands in the doorway, holding something behind his back. "You've been summoned," he says. You groan. "Please say it's for tea." Spiritual evaluation. Worse. You're marched itching violently back to the church where the local priest, a wiry man who looks like he drinks vinegar recreationally, wants to ask you about your dreams. Specifically, whether you've had any involving wolves, owls, or improperly buried bones. You haven't. Not even one suspicious goat. No. Suspicious. He sprinkles some water on you anyway. It smells like rosemary and mold. Here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Scotland, priests were tasked not only with spiritual guidance, but also with diagnosing soul afflictions, which included strange dreams, skin rashes, or the habit of speaking to birds. These were often seen as signs of fey interference, moral impurity, or more practically lice infestations. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely believed or mostly performance. Some claim villagers took comfort in being spiritually debugged. Others suggest the rituals were more about reminding people who had the authority to explain your rash. You're released with a handful of herbs tied in a cloth. Boil this, bathe in it, or just chew it and scream at the moon. You nod. Thanks. Back home, you do exactly as instructed, boiling the herbs in your cracked pot, soaking a rag in the brew, and pressing it to your skin. It smells like old salad. It helps, though. Slightly. The pig snores. The chicken digs a crater in your straw bed, looking for phantom seeds. The kitten curls around your foot, oblivious to your itchy, blurry-eyed crisis. You lie back down. Everything aches. Your mind drifts to the events of the last few days. Kale duels, leech therapy, chicken combat, spiritual flea exorcisms. You wonder what life would be like if you just kept walking during that first foggy morning. Maybe you'd be somewhere warm, now sipping barley tea, and not wondering if your kneecaps have fleas. But then you smile. Because somehow, through mud and blood and feathers, you're still here, still itchy, still uncertain, still alive. You step outside just as dawn limps over the hills, dragging with it a fog so thick it feels like walking through someone else's half-formed memory. The air is cool wet and absolutely uninterested in your opinion about it. You take a deep breath anyway. It smells like wood smoke mildew, and faintly mercifully of nothing. The village is silent, except for a few chickens pecking silently at puddles. The pig stands at the edge of your threshold, like a sentry snorting softly at passing mist. You nod at her. She does not nod back, but the respect is mutual. You walk slowly, knees creaking like old hinges down the path toward the river. Your boots squelch, still damp from 4 days ago. Your left sock has given up. Your right one is considering unionizing. You pass the same crooked fence, the same mossy boulder shaped like a loaf of bread, the same pine tree that looks suspiciously like it has opinions. Everything is still here, including you. And that's when it hits you. You made it. 1 full day, give or take several minor catastrophes in medieval Scotland. You survived turnip gruel. You outwitted a sheep. You fought for kale justice and won. You sang fake Latin to a bell ringer, fled from leeches, dodged a cattle raid, got semi-cursed by a witch, and were knighted unofficially by a chicken. You are cold. You are itchy. You are tired. But you are here. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the average medieval Scot just surviving 1 day meant navigating food scarcity, unpredictable weather, brutal clan politics, superstition, and a backbreaking workload. And yet they did it. For centuries. Not just surviving, but building stories, songs, and communities along the way. You sit on a rock beside the river. Mist clings to your arms like a shy child. You watch the water slide silently past, carrying leaves, twigs, and probably 3 feuds worth of secrets. The world feels older now, or maybe it's just you made wiser by wool and blisters. Here's your final quirky tidbit. In some Highland traditions, people would greet the morning fog with a whispered blessing. Not out loud, not dramatically, just a soft line to no one in particular. Let the day forget my name if it must, but not my shadow. Historians still argue whether that blessing was meant as protection from spirits or just from the neighbors. You repeat it softly, more to the river than yourself. Then you rise. The path home is slippery familiar. Your hut is warmish. The pig has already claimed your seat. The chicken has nested in your boots. You let them. You pull your blanket tight around your shoulders and lie back on your scratchy straw bed. You close your eyes, and this time you sleep. And now, wherever you are, maybe curled up under your own blanket, maybe still fighting the last of your thoughts for the day, let yourself unwind completely. Let your breathing slow. Let your jaw loosen. Let your mind drift soft and heavy into that fog we found together, the kind where thoughts lose their edges, where yesterday and tomorrow don't matter. Only this moment. You've walked through rain and mud, stared down, judgmental pigs, made uneasy peace with itchy wool, and somehow charmed a chicken into being your bodyguard. You've climbed through ancient routine and strange rituals, met grumpy bell ringers and quiet saints face combat over vegetables, and superstition disguised as medicine. And through all of it, you held your own. That's the quiet miracle of a medieval day, the fact that anyone ever got through one, let alone made it to the fire at night with stories to tell. You did that, so now let it all go. The scratch of history, the whisper of the river, the distant clang of a ladle against a pot, all fading into soft, formless sound. Let your muscles melt into your mattress. Let your heartbeat slow to match the rhythm of the sleeping hills. Let your eyelids grow heavier than turnips and twice as warm. You're safe now. You're done for today. The chickens are on watch. And even in the thickest fog, your shadow knows its way home. Sweet dreams. Peculiar rules of medieval Scottish clan feasts. We're slipping into the smoky, raucous world of a medieval Scottish clan feast deep in the Highlands around 1350. Picture yourself trudging up a muddy hill, the air sharp with pine and damp wool as torches flicker outside a stone-walled hall. Laughter and the clatter of wooden bowls spill out, mingling with the bleating of sheep in the distance. You're not just a guest. You're practically family, expected to help haul barrels and dodge the clan chief's grumpy hound. Fair warning, you probably won't survive the night if you forget which laird to toast first. You're standing at the edge of a bustling Highland village, the kind where every hut smells like peat smoke and wet dog. It's late afternoon, and the clan's gearing up for a feast that's less fancy banquet and more organized chaos with knives. These gatherings aren't just about food. They're the glue holding clans together, settling scores, and showing off who's got the best barley harvest. Around you, kilted men shout orders, while women lug baskets of turnips, and a kid chases a chicken that's clearly winning. The hall looms ahead, its roof thatched so thick it looks like a giant's bad haircut. You duck inside, and the air hits you warm heavy with the scent of roasting meat and something suspiciously like fermented oats. Historically, these feasts were power plays. Clans like the MacDonalds or Campbells used them to flex their wealth and loyalty, especially after the 1266 Treaty of Perth, when Scotland gained the Hebrides from Norway. More land meant more clans vying for dominance, and a good feast could seal alliances or start wars. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some clans believed the first dish served had to be touched by the chief's left hand for luck. Nobody knows why. But try forgetting that, and watch the room go silent. Historians still argue whether this was a Pictish holdover or just some laird's weird superstition. You're roped into helping naturally. A grizzled clansman named Angus, with a beard like a bird's nest, hands you a sack of oats and points to a corner. "Grind 'em, lass," he grumbles. Even if you're not a lass, Angus isn't big on details. You kneel by a quernstone, spinning the heavy granite until your arms scream. It's tedious, but there's a rhythm to it, like a heartbeat. The oats will become bannocks, flatbreads, baked on hot stones, a staple for tonight. You glance around. Others are hauling firewood, sharpening knives, or arguing over whose cow gets slaughtered. It's a community effort, but not the warm and fuzzy kind. More like everyone's too stubborn to let the other guy mess it up. The hall's a mess of activity. You trip over a pile of deer hides someone's using as tablecloths, because sure, why not? A woman with flour-dusted hands shoos you away, muttering about Sassenach clumsiness, which is rich since you're just trying to help. Here's a joke for you. Why did the clansman bring his own spoon to the feast? Because shearing's for weaklings, and nobody trusts the cook's hygiene. You chuckle, but then you notice the spoon's carved wood, or horn, some etched with clan symbols, dangling from belts like tiny trophies. You're sent to fetch water from a nearby burn a stream so cold it numbs your fingers. As you lug the bucket back, you pass a group of kids playing a game that looks like toss the rock at your cousin's head. It's oddly soothing, this slice of life, until you realize the feast is hours away and nobody's sleeping yet. The chief, a broad man with a scar across his nose, stomps past, barking about not enough ale. You make a mental note to steer clear of him later. He's got the vibe of someone who'd challenge you to a duel over a spilled drink. Back in the hall, you're handed a broom made of heather twigs. Sweeping the dirt floor feels pointless, but it's tradition, like brushing crumbs under the rug before guests arrive. The air's buzzing now, with pipers tuning their bagpipes in a corner, sounding like a cat fighting a goose. Another joke. What's a clan feast without bagpipes? A quiet one, and nobody wants that. You smirk, but the noise is growing on you, a drone that hums in your chest. As you work, you overhear two old women debating how many trout to serve. One insists on an odd number 7911, because even numbers invite bad spirits. It's the kind of fringe belief that makes you wonder how anyone survived back then. You sweep faster, hoping to avoid their glare. The hall's taking shape. Long tables, dragged-in benches, creaking under early arrivals. You're starting to feel the weight of the night ahead, the expectation to eat, drink, and not offend anyone with a sword. By now, your hands are gritty, your back aches, and you're wondering why you didn't stay home with a nice bowl of porridge. But there's something alive here, a pulse of community that's messy and loud and oddly comforting. You're part of it, for better or worse, and the feast hasn't even started. As you lean against a wall, catching your breath, you realize this is just the beginning, and you're already in too deep. You're still catching your breath in the smoky hall, the chaos of feast preparations swirling around you like a highland storm. The heather twig broom is out of your hands now, thank goodness, but you're not off the hook. A wiry woman with a face like weathered leather grabs your arm and pulls you toward a corner piled with scrolls and wax tablets. You look like you can read, she says, squinting, which is news to you, since literacy's about as common here as a sunny day. Tonight you're helping sort out the guest list, and let me tell you, it's less about who's coming and more about who's allowed to show up. This is where clan politics turn into a knife-edge dance, and one wrong invite could spark a feud that lasts generations. The hall's buzzing with pipers still practicing sounding like they're strangling that goose now, and the scent of roasting venison creeping in. You're handed a tattered parchment inked with names in a script so shaky it looks like it was written during a gallop. Your job: cross-check who's welcome and who's banned while dodging the glares of clansmen who'd rather settle this with swords than quills. The guest list for a medieval Scottish clan feast isn't just a formality. It's a power map. Around 1300, when clans were consolidating after the Wars of Independence, feasts became stages for alliances. Invite the wrong MacLeod, and suddenly your cattle are mysteriously missing next week. You scan the list, your finger tracing names like Duncan Campbell, Ewan MacDonald, and someone just called Red Iane the Loud. The quirky tidbit here: some clans insisted on inviting a neutral guest like a wandering monk or a bard to act as a buffer between rivals. Nobody wants to stab someone in front of a guy chanting psalms, right? But historians still argue whether this was about peacekeeping or just showing off how civilized the clan could pretend to be. You're interrupted by a hulking clansman who smells like he bathed in ale. He's arguing that his cousin Black Rory should be invited despite stealing sheep from the chief last spring. He's family, he roars, as if that settles it. You nod, trying not to laugh. Here's a joke. Why do clans invite their enemies to feasts? Because it's easier to poison them than chase them through the glen. The woman who you're calling Morag, because she hasn't bothered with introductions, rolls her eyes and scratches Rory's name off with a quill that's seen better days. The politics get trickier. You notice some names have symbols next to them, a cross for allies, a slash for rivals, and a weird squiggle you're told means owes us a cow. Morag explains in a whisper that smells of onions that the chief's planning to marry his daughter to a rival clan's son. The feast is the test run invite. Both families see if they can share a table without bloodshed. You're starting to realize why everyone's so tense. This isn't just dinner. It's diplomacy with a side of haggis. You're sent to deliver a verbal invite to a nearby laird, which means trudging through mud so thick it's practically sentient. The path winds past stone walls and a lock that glitters like polished slate under the fading light. You pass a shepherd whistling to his flock, and for a moment the world feels calm until a raven caws and you remember Morag's warning about bad omens. Superstition's big here, and you're half convinced that birds judging your muddy boots. Back at the hall, you report the laird's grudging acceptance. Morag's now arguing with a cook about seating. Apparently placing two rival clans too close is like lighting a fuse. You're handed another list, this one ranking guests by status. The chief sits at the high table, obviously, but lesser clansmen get benches near the drafty door. Here's another joke. Why's the best seat at a clan feast? The worst, because you're stuck next to the chief's dog and it's got terrible manners. You're starting to feel the weight of these decisions. Every name you approve or reject ripples outward, like tossing a stone into that lock. You overhear two clansmen betting on whether the McDougals will show up after last year's incident with a stolen horse. Nobody's explaining what happened, but the word fistfight floats around. You're tempted to ask, but Morag's glare says to keep your head down and your quill moving. The hall's getting louder, with more people piling in to help or just snoop. You spot Angus from earlier, the beard guy now hauling a barrel and singing something about a lass and a lost cow. It's off-key, but oddly soothing, like a lullaby for people who hate sleep. You're handed a wax tablet to tally who's bringing what ale bread, or in one case, 3 geese and a grudge. The fringe detail sticks with you. Some clans brought symbolic gifts like a single oatcake to signal peace. Forget it, and you're basically declaring war. As you work, the firelight dances on the walls, casting shadows that look like warriors mid-battle. You're exhausted, your fingers smudged with ink, but there's a strange thrill in being part of this. You're not just planning a party. You're weaving a web of alliances, grudges, and barely contained chaos. The guest list is almost done, but you know the real test comes when these names turn into actual people, all crammed into one hall, eating, drinking, and trying not to start a riot. You lean against a table, stealing a moment to breathe. The air's thick with smoke and anticipation, and you can't shake the feeling that you're in over your head. Morag pats your shoulder, which is either encouragement or a warning. The feast is tomorrow, and you're already wondering how you'll survive the night, let alone the politics. You're back in the Highland Hall, the air thick with peat smoke and the faint tang of nervous sweat. The guest list is mostly sorted. Thankfully, Morag's taken over the final squabbles about who sits where, but now you're thrust into a new task, setting up the feast hall. This isn't just dragging tables around. It's a ritual, a dance of tradition and clan pride, where every bench and candle carries meaning. You're elbow deep in a world of peculiar rules, and one wrong move could insult a laird, or worse, make you the butt of Angus's next drunken joke. The hall's a hive of activity, with clansmen hauling in trestles and women arranging rushes on the floor, their chatter mingling with the distant wail of bagpipes still sounding like that goose is losing. You're handed a stack of woven wool cloths, dyed in the clan's tartan, and told to drape them over the high table. These aren't just decorations. They're a statement. Historically, by the 14th century, tartans were early symbols of clan identity, especially after the Bruce's victory at Bannockburn solidified regional power. Each pattern told a story, and you're careful not to mix up this clan's green and blue weave with their rivals' red and black. A quirky tidbit. Some clans believed the tablecloth had to be laid by a virgin to ward off bad luck. Nobody's checking your credentials, but the old woman supervising you, Elspeth, gives you a suspicious squint. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine superstition or just a way to keep nosy guests from meddling with the setup. You fumble with the cloth, its coarse fibers snagging on your fingers. Elspeth barks, "Mind the corners, ye daft turnip," and you stifle a laugh. Here's a joke. Why's a clan tablecloth like a laird's ego? Both need constant smoothing, and neither takes kindly to stains. You spread the fabric, making sure it hangs evenly, while Elspeth mutters about Sassenach's sloppiness, the high tables for the chief, and his inner circle raised on a platform so everyone can see who's in charge. You notice it's scarred from years of feasts with knife marks and what looks like a burn from a toppled candle, each blemish a story nobody's telling you. Next, you're sent to arrange benches, heavy oak slabs that creak like they're complaining. The seating plan's a minefield. The chief's allies get spots near the fire, warm and prestigious, while lesser clansmen are stuck by the drafty door. You drag a bench, your arms burning, and nearly drop it when a kid darts past chasing a rat that's bolder than most of the guests. The floor's covered in fresh rushes, sprinkled with herbs like meadowsweet to mask the smell of spilled ale and unwashed feet. It's a nice touch, but you're not fooled this place will reek by midnight. You're handed a bundle of tallow candles, their wicks already flickering, as you set them in iron holders. The rule here is odd. Every candle must be lit by the same flint, passed hand to bind the clan's luck. You're not sure if it's spiritual or just a fire hazard, but you follow along striking the flint until your knuckles ache. The candles cast a warm glow softening the hall's rough edges, and for a moment it feels almost cozy. Then Angus stumbles by, sloshing ale and singing about a cow again, and the spell's broken. You're roped into hanging garlands, twisted branches of holly, and heather tied with wool scraps. These are meant to honor the land, but they're prickly, and you're pretty sure you've got a thorn in your thumb. Elspeth insists the garlands must circle the hall clockwise, else the spirits will curse the broth. You nod, wondering if she's pulling your leg, but you're not risking it. Here's another joke. Why do clans decorate with holly? Because nothing says festive like a plant that fights back. The fringe detail hits you when you're told to place a single stone at the high table's center. It's smooth, river-worn, and etched with a spiral, supposedly a relic from the clan's founding. Nobody touches it, not even the chief, and you're warned to step back after setting it down. It's the kind of weird tradition that makes you wonder if you're in a history lesson or a fairy tale. You place it carefully, feeling the weight of eyes on you, and move on before anyone decides you're cursed. You're sent to fetch wooden bowls from a storage nook, each one carved with clan symbols, stag's thistles, or knots. They're heavy, and you stack them like you're playing a medieval version of Jenga. The bowls are for communal eating, which sounds cozy until you realize you're sharing with people who think bath is a river's job. You arrange them along the tables, spacing them just so while overhearing two clansmen argue about whether the MacLeods deserve a spot near the chief. It's the guest list drama from earlier rearing its head again, and you're glad you're not the one deciding. The hall's starting to look like a proper feast venue, though it's still rough around the edges, like a barn trying to pass as a palace. You're tasked with scattering salt along the tables, a ritual to purify the meal. It's not much, just a pinch per table, but salt's pricey worth more than some of the guests' swords. You sprinkle it carefully, avoiding Elspeth's hawk-like stare. The mainstream fact sinks in. Salt was a status symbol in medieval Scotland, often locked away like gold, and showing it off at a feast was a flex. As you work, the bagpipes hit a new pitch, and you wince someone's definitely torturing that goose now. But the sound's weaving into the background, a drone that hums in your bones. You're tired, your hands sticky with wax and scratched from holly, but there's a rhythm to this chaos. The hall's transforming, and you're part of it, even if you're just the one hauling benches and dodging Elspeth's insults. You steal a moment to lean against a wall, the stone cool against your back. The fire's roaring now, casting shadows that dance like ghosts of past feasts. You can almost feel the weight of tomorrow's gathering, the laughter, the tension, the clink of horns. You're not sure if you're ready, but the hall is, and that's something. For now, you breathe in the smoky air and brace for whatever comes next. You're out of the hall now, the smoky warmth swapped for a biting Highland dawn that nips at your nose. The feast is tonight, and you've been roped into the grunt work of gathering food for the clan's massive menu. This isn't a quick trip to the market. Think trudging through bogs, dodging ornery goats, and praying you don't fall into a loch. The air smells of damp earth and heather, and somewhere nearby, a cow lows, like it knows its days are numbered. You're part of a ragtag crew, led by a wiry hunter named Lachlan, whose idea of encouragement is a grunt and a point. The clan's expecting a spread that'll feed dozens, and you're starting to see why these feasts are a logistical nightmare wrapped in tartan. Your first task is hunting, because no feast is complete without meat. Lachlan hands you a bow that's heavier than it looks and nods toward a misty glen. Historically, venison was a Highland staple, especially after the 14th century decline in cattle raids made deer a safer bet. Clans relied on skilled hunters to track red deer across rugged terrain, and a good haul could make or break a feast's prestige. You're no Robin Hood, but you follow Lachlan's crew, your boots sinking into mud with every step. The quirky tidbit: some clans believed a deer's antlers had to be hung above the hall's door before cooking, or the meat would anger the forest spirits. Historians still argue whether this was pagan residue or just a way to flex hunting prowess. You're stumbling through bracken when Lachlan signals to freeze. A stag's grazing ahead, oblivious its breath steaming in the chill. You nock an arrow, your hands shaking, partly from cold, partly because you're not sure you can hit a tree, let alone a deer. Lachlan's glare says, "Don't mess this up," so you aim miss spectacularly and watch the stag bolt. Here's a joke. Why's a Highland hunter, like a bad date, both spend hours chasing something that's not interested? Lachlan doesn't laugh, but he mutters something about city folk and moves on. Next, you're sent to forage because meat alone won't cut it. You're paired with a girl named Fiona, who's got a basket and an attitude sharper than her sickle. She's gathering wild leeks and sorrel her hands, moving like she was born doing this. You're handed a sack and told to find crab apples, small sour things that grow in gnarled thickets. The thorns are vicious, and you're pretty sure you're bleeding. But Fiona just smirks and says, "You'll live." You fill the sack, your fingers stained red, and wonder how anyone turns these into food. The answer's bannocks and stews, where crab apples add a tart kick to stretch meager supplies. You trudge to a stream to help catch fish, your boots squelching. A group's already there, using woven nets to snag trout. You're handed a net slippery and heavy and told to wade in. The water's so cold it feels like it's biting you, and you're half convinced you'll lose a toe. You flail splash and somehow catch a single trout, which Fiona calls pathetic but edible. Another joke: why do clans fish in freezing streams? Because warm water's for weaklings and Englishmen. You chuckle, but your teeth are chattering too hard to enjoy it. The fringe detail comes when you're sent to collect seaweed. Yes, seaweed. Lachlan explains it's dried and crumbled into broth for flavor, a trick coastal clans used when salt was scarce. You're skeptical, but you scramble over rocks, the sea air sharp in your lungs, and gather slimy handfuls of dulse. It smells like low tide, but you're told it's a delicacy. You stuff it into a basket, dodging waves that seem personally offended by your presence. Back on land, you're roped into herding sheep for slaughter. The animals are stubborn, and you're not much better slipping in mud as you chase a ewe that's clearly smarter than you. The clan's chosen 3 sheep for the feast, their wool already shorn for weaving. You help corral them, your arms aching, while Lachlan sharpens a knife that looks like it could fell a tree. You don't stick around for the messy part. Let's just say the stew will be hearty. You're sent to check the barley stores, because no feast happens without ale and bread. The granary's a damp shed, and you're counting sacks under the watchful eye of an old man who smells like fermented oats. Barley was gold in medieval Scotland, often traded like currency, and a feast's quality hinged on how much you could spare. You heft a sack, your back protesting, and wonder how many bannocks this'll make. The old man grumbles about thieving McLeods, and you nod, pretending you know what he's on about. As the sun climbs, you're hauling your haul back to the hall, fish, apples, seaweed, and a lingering sense of defeat. The crew's bickering about who caught more, and you're just happy to be alive. The landscape's gorgeous, all rolling hills and mist, but you're too tired to care. You pass a kid tossing stones into a burn, and it's oddly calming, like the world's reminding you to slow down. You reach the hall, your arms full, and your boots caked in mud. Lachlan gives you a nod, high praise from him, and you collapse against a wall, the scent of roasting meat already drifting out. You're filthy freezing and faintly proud. The feast menu is taking shape, and you helped even if your archery skills are a clan joke. For now, you catch your breath, the hum of preparation pulling you deeper into this chaotic living world. You're back in the Highland Hall, but now you're deep in the heart of the beast, the kitchen. The feast is hours away, and you've been dragged into the smoky, sweltering chaos of cooking for a clan that eats like it's their last day on earth. The air's thick with steam-singed herbs and the sharp tang of boiling mutton. Pots bubble over open fires, and you're dodging sparks, while a cook named Mary, with arms like tree trunks, barks orders like she's leading a siege. You're stirring a cauldron so big it could double as a bathtub, and let's be honest, you're not sure if you're cooking dinner or summoning a demon. This is clan-style cooking, where every recipe comes with a side of superstition and a lot of yelling. You're wrist deep in a broth that smells like seaweed and hope stirring with a wooden paddle that's seen better days. Historically, medieval Scottish kitchens were the backbone of feasts, turning meager harvests into meals that fed dozens. By the 1300s, clans relied on communal cooking to stretch resources, especially after famines like the one in 1315-17 that hit Europe hard. Everything barley fish, even that dulse you hauled in earlier, gets thrown into the pot. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believed stirring had to go widdershins counterclockwise to keep evil spirits out of the stew. Nobody's explaining why, but Mary's watching you like you might curse the whole feast if you spin the wrong way. Historians still argue whether this was a Celtic holdover or just cooks being extra. You're sweating now, the fire's heat licking at your face. Mary hands you a basket of leeks and tells you to chop fast. The knife's dull, the leeks are muddy, and you're pretty sure you just cut your thumb instead of a stalk. Here's a joke. Why's a clan kitchen like a battlefield? Because the only survivors are the ones who keep moving. You laugh under your breath, but Mary's glare says to focus, or you're next in the pot. You chop faster, tossing leeks into the broth, where they sink like reluctant swimmers. Next, you're kneading dough for bannocks, those flatbreads you ground oats for way back when. The dough's sticky, clinging to your fingers like it's got a grudge. You're working on a stone slab, dusted with barley flour, while a kid fans the fire with a bellows that wheezes like an old man. The bannocks will bake on hot stones, and you're told to shape them round like the moon, not your head. You smirk, remembering that oat grinding grind with Angus feels like a lifetime ago. The dough's tough, but there's a rhythm to it, a steady push and pull that's almost meditative. You're sent to check the roasting venison, a massive haunch skewered over the main fire. The fat drips hissing in the flames, and the smell's so good you're ready to risk Mary's wrath for a bite. You turn the spit, your arms aching, while a cook sprinkles it with crushed juniper berries, fancy for a clan that thinks soap's optional. The fringe detail hits you. Some clans added a chief's portion, a cut of meat set aside for the laird to bless before serving. It's not eaten, just waved around like a holy relic, then given to the dogs. You glance at the chief's hound snoring by the fire and figure it's living better than you are. You're roped into grinding spices. Well, spices is generous. It's mostly wild garlic, and something Mary calls bog myrtle, which smells like a swamp had a baby with a pine tree. You're using a mortar and pestle, and the grinding's so repetitive, you're half asleep, lulled by the crackle of the fire. Another joke. Why do clan cooks love bog myrtle? Because it hides the taste of last week's leftovers. You chuckle, but Mary's onto you, tossing you a sack of turnips to peel. The turnips are knobby, like they grew up fighting for space, and your knife slips more than it cuts. The kitchen's a cacophony, clanging pots, shouting cooks, and the occasional bleat of a sheep that wandered too close. You're stirring again, this time a porridge-like mix of barley and fish that's supposed to be a side dish. It looks like glue, but Mary swears it's a crowd pleaser. You're skeptical, especially when she adds a handful of that dulse, which floats like sad confetti. The mainstream fact sinks in. Fish was a feast staple in Scotland, especially trout and salmon, because rivers were more reliable than crops in the Rocky Highlands. You're sent to fetch more firewood, which means stumbling outside into air so cold it slaps you awake. The woodpile's a mess, half buried in mud, and you're hauling logs while dodging a kid who's throwing sticks at a crow. It's chaos, but there's a strange comfort in it, like the clan's one big dysfunctional family. Back inside, you stack the wood, your hands splintered, and your tunic soaked with sweat and broth. Mary gives you a nod high praise, and you feel a flicker of pride, even if you're basically a human dish rag. As you work, you overhear two cooks debating how much ale to brew. One insists on extra for the toasts, while the other mutters about last year's brawl. You're starting to see the feast as a ticking time bomb food drink and grudges all in one room. The fire's roaring now, casting shadows that dance across the stone walls, and you're caught in the rhythm of it all. Stir, chop, knead, repeat. You're exhausted, but the kitchen's alive, a pulsing heart, feeding the clan's big night. You steal a moment to lean against a barrel, the steam curling around you like a warm blanket. The feast is close, and you can almost taste the chaos to come. For now, you're just trying to keep up one leaky pot at a time. You're still in the Highland Hall, the kitchen's heat clinging to your skin like a second tunic, but you've been yanked from stirring pots to a new role serving the feast. The tables are set, the candles flicker, and the air hums with anticipation as guests start trickling in their boots, thudding on the rush-strewn floor. You're handed a massive wooden platter piled with steaming bannocks and told to move quick, but don't drop it. The feast is kicking off, and you're learning fast that serving in a medieval Scottish clan isn't just passing out food, it's a performance bound by strange customs that feel like a mix of theater and tightrope walking. One wrong step, and you'll offend a laird or start a brawl. You weave through the crowd, the platter heavy in your arms, dodging elbows, and the chief's hound who's eyeing your bannocks like they're his birthright. Historically, serving at clan feasts was a structured ritual, especially in the 14th century, when clans like the MacDonalds used feasts to cement their authority after Robert the Bruce's reign. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was a message abundance meant power. The quirky tidbit: some clans required servers to bow to the high table before placing each dish, but only with the right knee-bent left knee, and you're practically begging for a duel. Historians still argue whether this was about respect or just another way to trip up rival clan servants. You reach the high table, where the chief sits, his beard flecked with ale already. You bow right knee, thank you very much, and set down the bannocks. He grunts approval, which feels like winning a prize. Here's a joke: why serving at a clan feast like juggling? Because you're balancing food egos and the urge to run away. You smirk but keep moving, because Mary's watching from the kitchen door, and her glare could curdle milk. Next, you're lugging a cauldron of broth, the same seaweed and leek mix you stirred earlier. The rule here is bizarre. The first bowl must go to the guest of honor, poured from a specific ladle carved with a thistle. You're handed the ladle, its handle worn smooth, and you're praying you don't spill on someone's tartan. The guest of honor, a grizzled laird with a scar like a lightning bolt, nods as you pour, but his eyes say, one drop, and you're sheep food. You manage it barely, and move down the table, ladling out broth that smells better than it looks. You're sent back for the venison that haunch you turned on the spit, now carved into chunks. The custom's odd. Each piece must be placed on the table, with a sprig of heather tucked beside it to honor the hunt. You're juggling meat and greenery, trying not to look like you're decorating a salad. The heather's prickly, and you're pretty sure you've got another thorn in your thumb. Call it a souvenir from that garland duty with Elspeth. The fringe detail hits you. Some clans believe the heather had to come from a specific hill, or the dish would bring bad luck. You're just glad nobody's quizzing you on the hill's name. The hall's getting louder, with laughter, clinking horns, and the bagpipes. Yep, the goose is officially deceased. You're carrying a tray of fish, those trout you caught in that freezing stream, now baked with wild garlic. The rule: serve the fish head first, because turning it tail first insults the river spirits. You're not sure if you believe in river spirits, but you're not risking a curse, so you align each trout like it's marching to war. Another joke: why do clans care about fish heads? Because even the river gets a seat at the table. You chuckle, but a clansman's glare shuts you up fast. You're weaving through the crowd again, your arms screaming from the weight of platters. The mainstream fact sinks in. Communal eating was the norm, with everyone digging into shared bowls. No forks, just spoons, and knives they brought themselves. You spot those carved spoons from earlier dangling from belts and realize hygiene's more of a suggestion here. You're tempted to keep your hands in your pockets, but there's no time. You're already hauling a basket of crab apples served raw as a palate cleanser. The custom's to toss one to each guest like you're playing catch, and you're dodging hands and laughter as apples fly. The chaos is oddly soothing, a rhythm of clatter and chatter that pulls you along. You're sent to refill ale jugs, the liquid sloshing as you pour from a barrel that smells like fermented regret. The rule here is to toast the chief before serving a quick slaint that you mumble under your breath. You're not sure if you're doing it right, but nobody's thrown a knife yet, so you call it a win. You're starting to feel the feast's pulse, the way food and ritual tie this messy clan together. As you work, you overhear two guests arguing about who gets the chief's portion, that blessed meat you saw in the kitchen. It's still sitting by the chief untouched, and you're betting the hounds got dibs. You're tired, your tunic stained with broth and ale, but there's a strange thrill in being the one keeping this feast moving. You steal a moment to lean against a wall, the firelight warm on your face, and watch the hall come alive, food noise and all. You're still weaving through the Highland feast, the hall now, a roaring sea of laughter, clinking horns, and the faint crunch of bannocks being devoured. The platters you hauled are mostly empty, and you've dodged enough elbows to qualify for a medal, but your job's shifted again. Now you're a guest, sort of squeezed onto a bench, between a burly clansman who smells like wet sheep and a kid who's flicking crabapple seeds at his cousin. Your role: survive the meal without breaking the clan's bizarre table manners. These aren't your grandma's elbows off the table rules. They're a maze of customs so peculiar, you're half convinced the clan made them up to mess with outsiders. The fire's crackling. The bagpipes are droning. Yep, that goose is long gone, and you're trying to eat without starting a war. You reach for a shared bowl of broth, its surface shimmering with grease and bits of that dulse you gathered. Historically, clan feasts in the 14th century were communal affairs, with everyone digging into the same dishes to show unity, grudges or not. No plates, just bowls passed hand to hand, and you're using your own spoon, that carved wooden one you saw dangling from belts earlier. The quirky tidbit: some clans insisted you could only scoop broth with your right hand because the left was unlucky, never mind that half the guests are left-handed and grumbling. Historians still argue whether this was a religious rule or just another way to spot rival clansmen who didn't get the memo. You dip your spoon, careful not to slurp. Apparently slurping's fine for ale, but rude for broth, go figure. The clansman next to you, let's call him Big Hamish, grabs a hunk of venison and tears into it like it personally offended him. You're supposed to wait for the chief to take the first bite of each dish, but he's busy toasting, so everyone's sneaking nibbles. Here's a joke. Why's a clan feast like a bad family reunion? Everyone's eating, but nobody's talking to Uncle Hamish. You smirk, but keep it quiet. Hamish's knife looks sharper than his manners. The next rule's a doozy. You can't cut your bannock with a knife. You have to break it with your hands, and only into 3 pieces for the spirits. You fumble with the bannock, its crust crumbling onto your lap, and the kid snickers. You're tempted to flick a crabapple seed back, but you're already on thin ice. The bannock's dense, like chewing a very determined pancake, but it's warm and filling. You're starting to see why these feasts were worth the chaos. Food like this, in a harsh Highland winter, feels like a hug from the inside. You reach for the trout, remembering to keep the head facing you. River spirits, right? The fish is flaky, spiked with that wild garlic. You ground in the kitchen, and you're actually enjoying it until Hamish leans over his breath, like fermented oats, and offers you a bite of his. Sharing's a big deal, a sign of trust, so you nod, trying not to gag. Another joke. Why do clans share food? Because nothing says we're friends like forcing you to eat their leftovers. You take a tiny nibble, smile, and pray you don't regret it later. The fringe detail comes with the ale. You're handed a horn, yes, an actual cow horn, and told to drink only after toasting the chief's health. The catch. You can't set the horn down until it's empty, because a half-drunk horn invites betrayal. Your horn's the size of your forearm, and the ale's strong enough to strip paint. You mutter slaint and sip your eyes watering, while the kid giggles, and Hamish slaps your back like you're a horse. You're not sure if you're bonding or being hazed, but you keep drinking the ale's warmth, spreading through you like a fuzzy blanket. You're navigating another rule. Don't touch the chief's portion, that blessed venison still sitting untouched by the high table. It's practically glowing with importance, and you're betting the hound's counting the minutes until it's his. You glance at the chief, who's laughing with a rival laird, and wonder how he keeps track of all these customs. The mainstream fact hits you. These manners weren't just quirks. They were social glue reinforcing hierarchy and clan loyalty in a world where a stray insult could spark a feud. You're offered a crabapple tossed by a clansman across the table. You catch it barely and take a bite, its sourness cutting through the heavy broth. The rule here is to eat it whole seed and all to swallow the bitterness of winter. You're not thrilled, but you chew the crunch loud in your ears. The hall's a cacophony now with stories, songs, and the occasional shout as someone spills ale. You're starting to feel the feast's rhythm, a messy blend of food rules and barely contained chaos. You lean back, your stomach full, and your head buzzing from the ale. The firelight dances on the walls, casting shadows that look like warriors mid-toast. You're tired, your hands sticky with broth and bannock crumbs, but there's a warmth here, not just from the fire, but from being part of this loud living moment. You're not sure if you're nailing the manners, but you're still alive, and that's a win. For now, you sip your ale brace for the next rule and let the feast carry you along. You're still wedged on that creaky bench, the Highland feast in full swing, your stomach heavy with broth, and that crab apple you're still questioning. The hall's a riot of noise, laughter, clinking horns, and the bagpipes, which have somehow gotten louder, like the goose is putting up a final fight. You've survived the maze of table manners, but now the feast is shifting gears. The food's slowing down, and the storytelling's taking over. Bards and clansmen are spinning tales, their voices weaving through the smoky air like threads in a tartan. You're leaning forward, ale horn in hand, trying to catch every word while dodging the kid next to you, who's now carving his initials into the table with a spoon. This is the heart of the feast, where stories and songs bind the clan tighter than any oath. You're listening to a bard, an old man, with a voice like gravel and honey strumming a small harp that looks older than the hills. Historically, bards were the memory keepers of medieval Scotland, especially in the 14th century, when oral tradition trumped written records. They sang of heroes' battles and lost loves, preserving clan history after events like the Wars of Independence. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believed a bard's song could curse or bless the feast, so they'd sprinkle salt on his harp strings for luck. Nobody's sure why, but you spot a pinch of salt glinting on the wood. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a sneaky way to keep bards from drinking all the ale. The Bard's Tale is about a warrior who outwitted a rival clan by hiding in a loch, breathing through a reed. You're picturing it? The cold water, the reeds tickling his nose when Big Hamish, your sheep-scented benchmate, snorts and says it's pure nonsense. He launches into his own story about his grandfather stealing cattle under moonlight. Here's a joke. Why is a clan story like their ale? Both get stronger the longer they sit. You smirk, but you're hooked. The words, painting pictures in the firelight. You're handed another ale horn. When did you finish the last one? And you sip the buzz, softening the edges of the hall. The next storyteller's a woman, her voice low and steady, singing of a selkie who traded her seal skin for love only to swim away. The melody's haunting, and you're swaying a little caught in the rhythm. The custom here is odd listeners toss a pebble into a bowl after each tale to anchor the words. You fumble for a stone from your pocket, probably from that muddy trek with Lachlan, and drop it in the clink, joining a dozen others. It's a small act, but it feels like you're part of something ancient. You're starting to notice the story's purpose. They're not just entertainment. They're glue reminding everyone who they are, McDonald's Campbell's, or whoever's claiming this hall. The mainstream fact hits you. These tales reinforced clan identity, especially when feuds or alliances hung in the balance. You glance at the high table, where the chief's nodding along, his eyes sharp despite the ale. He's listening for any hint of disrespect, like a bard slipping a rival's name into a hero's role. You're glad you're not the one singing. The fringe detail comes when a young clansman stands, his face flushed, and recites a poem about a storm that spared the clan's crops. The catch: he has to finish without stuttering, or it's bad luck for next year's harvest. He stumbles on thunder, and the room groans, half joking, half nervous. You're tempted to laugh, but you catch Morag's eye from across the hall, and her frown says, "Don't test fate." Another joke. Why's a clan poet like a tightrope walker? One wrong step, and the whole room's cursing you. You bite your lip, keeping quiet as the kid sits down red-faced. You're pulled into a new song, a group effort, about a battle nobody's sure actually happened. Everyone's joining in, their voices rough, but warm, like a fire you didn't know you needed. You mumble, along faking the words, and Hamish slaps your shoulder, which is either approval or an accident. The song's about a laird who tricked an enemy with a fake feast, ironic given the grudges simmering around you. You're remembering that guest list drama, the slashed names and squiggles, and wondering if this feast is hiding its own tricks. The hall's alive with stories, now each one layering onto the last. You're handed a bannock. When did these get passed around again? And you nibble the crumbs falling onto your tunic. The fire's casting shadows that dance like the warriors in the Bard's Tale, and you're sinking into the moment, the ale and songs blurring the line between past and present. You're not just a guest. You're a thread in this tapestry, even if you're still dodging that kid's spoon-carving project. You lean back the bench creaking and let the stories wash over you. The bagpipes hum, the voices rise and fall, and for a moment the chaos of the feast feels like home. You're tired, your head fuzzy, but you don't want this to end. The clan's history is alive in these words, and you're carrying it one pebble at a time. You're still in the thick of the Highland feast, the hall pulsing with the afterglow of bards' tales, and that selkie song still humming in your head. The fire's crackling, casting flickers across faces flushed with ale, and the bagpipes have mercifully dialed back to a low drone. Maybe the goose won a round. You're wedged on your bench, the kid next to you now, asleep, his spoon-carving dreams abandoned. But the feast isn't slowing down. It's veering into dangerous territory, drinking games. You're clutching a horn of ale that feels like it's multiplying, and the clan's about to test your endurance with toasts and challenges that could floor a horse. These aren't just games, they're a gauntlet wrapped in laughter and the faint threat of chaos. You're pulled into the fray when Big Hamish, your sheep-scented benchmate, shoves a fresh horn into your hands and bellows, "To the chief." The hall erupts, horns raised, and you're shouting slant like your life depends on it. Historically, drinking at 14th century Scottish feasts was a ritual of loyalty, especially after the power shifts following Bannockburn, when clans used toast to signal allegiance or hide betrayal. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believed the ale had to be brewed with water from a specific spring, or it'd bring bad luck. Nobody's saying which spring, but you're hoping it wasn't the one with the dead fish you saw. Historians still argue whether this was about purity or just clans flexing their control over local streams. You down a gulp, the ale bitter and strong, like drinking a forest. The first game's simple. Pass the horn around the table, each person drinking and toasting something absurd, like the chief's beard or my cow's honor. You're up, and you mutter to the bannocks because your brain's fuzzy. The table roars with laughter, and Hamish slaps your back so hard you nearly choke. Here's a joke. Why's a clan toast like a bad promise? Both sound great until you're stuck keeping it. You grin, but you're already dreading the next round. The game gets trickier. You're handed a smaller horn, this one etched with a stag, and told to drink while standing on one leg because sure, that's logical. The rules strict: spill a drop, and you owe the table a song. You wobble your boot, slipping on the rush-strewn floor, and a trickle of ale hits your tunic. The hall hoots, and you're half tempted to fake a limp. You're no bard, so you mumble a verse about a sheep that sounds like Angus's cow song, and the crowd's kind enough to cheer instead of boo. You sit, your face burning, and wonder why you didn't stick to serving. The fringe detail hits when a clansman starts a game called the Laird's Gauntlet. You have to drink 3 horns in a row, each with a different toast without pausing. The catch: the horns get bigger, and the last one's nicknamed the Widowmaker. You're roped in because Hamish is having too much fun to let you escape. You manage the first 2 small, thank the spirits, but the third is a monster, sloshing like a tidal wave. You toast the fire's warmth, choke it down, and collapse the hall, cheering like you've slain a dragon. You're dizzy but alive, and that's a win. You're starting to see the game's purpose. They're not just fun. They're a test, weeding out the weak and bonding the clan through shared ridiculousness. The mainstream fact sinks in. Drinking rituals were social glue diffusing tension in a room full of armed men with grudges. You glance at the high table, where the chiefs matching toasts with a rival laird, their smiles tight. You're remembering that guest list drama, red IA and black Rory, all those squiggles, and wondering if these games are keeping the peace or just delaying the inevitable. Another game starts the silent horn. You drink without speaking, staring down your table mate, Hamish naturally, until one of you blinks. His eyes are like a wolf's, and you're blinking in seconds to more laughter. Another joke? Why's a clan staring contests like they're feuds? Both end with someone losing an eye. You laugh, but you're keeping your distance from Hamish's knife just in case. You're handed a bannock to soak up the ale, and you nibble the crumbs, mixing with the ale's aftertaste. The hall's a blur of noise and motion, with clansmen stumbling, singing, and one guy trying to balance a horn on his nose. You're caught in the chaos, your head swimming, but there's a warmth here, a sense of belonging, even if you're the outsider who can't hold a horn. The firelight dances the shadows, weaving stories you're too tipsy to follow. You lean back the bench, creaking, and catch your breath. The games are winding down, but the feast's energy is still high, like a river ready to overflow. You're not sure how much more ale you can handle, but you're in too deep to back out now. For now, you clutch your horn brace for the next toast and let the clan's wild heart carry you along. You're still in the Highland Hall, the feast's chaos swirling around you like a storm that's forgotten how to quit. The drinking games have left your head fuzzy, the ale's warmth lingering in your chest, and the bagpipes are back at it. Sorry, goose, you're done for. You're slumped on your bench, the kid next to you, now snoring with his face in a bannock, and Big Hamish is singing something about a lost goat that's definitely not in tune. The feast is hitting a new phase gift-giving. This isn't your modern. Here's a gift card vibe. It's a tense symbolic ritual where every offering carries the weight of alliance grudge or outright shade. You're watching wide-eyed as clansmen step up to the high table, and you're praying you don't have to hand over anything more than a smile. The hall quiets just a bit as the first gift is presented. A clansman, wiry and nervous, offers the chief a dagger. Its hilt, wrapped in leather, dyed the clan's colors. Historically, gift-giving at 14th century Scottish feasts was a public flex, especially after power struggles like the Bruce's consolidation of clans. Gifts showed loyalty or brokered peace, but they could also stir trouble if misjudged. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believed the gift had to be touched by the giver's blood. Nothing dramatic, just a nick of the finger to seal its intent. You're glad nobody's bleeding tonight, but the dagger's edge glints like it's got stories to tell. Historians still argue whether this blood thing was about trust or just a way to make sure nobody gifted a rusty knife. You're nudged by Hamish, who's sobering up enough to whisper that the dagger's from a rival clan. A peace offering after last year's sheep-stealing fiasco sounds like Black Rory's crew from that guest list drama. The chief accepts it with a nod, but his eyes are sharp, like he's weighing the blade's cost against the giver's nerve. You're starting to get why this feels like a chess game with swords. Here's a joke. Why's a clan? Gift like a bad apology. Both come with strings attached, and nobody's buying it. You stifle a laugh, because the room's tense, and you're not keen on drawing attention. Next up is a woman, her hair braided with heather, presenting a woven blanket. Its pattern, a mix of both clans' tartans. It's a bold move signaling unity, and you're remembering that marriage alliance Morag mentioned way back when you were sorting invites. The blanket's laid at the chief's feet, and he touches it with his left hand. Yep, that lucky hand rule from the feast prep. The crowd murmurs approval, but you catch a few sour faces near the door. You're handed a horn of ale to pass along, and you sip first bad manners, but you're parched, and nobody's looking. The gifts keep coming. A carved horn from a minor clansman, a sack of barley from a farmer who looks like he's giving away his soul. And here's the fringe detail: a single goose feather presented by a kid who can't be older than 10. The feather's tied with a red thread, and the kid mumbles it's for the wind's favor. The hall goes quiet, then chuckles, but the chief tucks it into his belt, and you're wondering if it's a kid's whim or some deep clan magic nobody's explaining. You're betting on magic because this feast is weird like that. You're roped into helping carry a gift, a heavy wooden chest inlaid with bone, from a laird who's been glaring at the chief all night. You and another poor soul lug it to the high table, your arms screaming, and you're praying it's not full of rocks. The laird opens it to reveal furs, deer, and fox soft as a cloud. It's a power move, screaming wealth, and the chief's smile is so tight you're sure it hurts. You're back on your bench before anyone notices your sweaty face, and Hamish mutters, "That one's trouble." You're not asking for details. You've got enough to worry about. Another gift's a basket of crab apples, like the ones you forage, with Fiona presented with a bow that's more sarcastic than sincere. The rule here's odd. The giver has to eat one first to prove it's not poisoned. The clansman takes a bite, wincing at the sourness, and you're biting your lip to keep from laughing. Another joke. Why do clans test their gifts? Because trust is just another word for check for poison. The hall laughs too, and for a moment the tension eases. You're starting to see the gift's rhythm. They're a language speaking of debts, paid or owed. The mainstream fact hits you. These exchanges were diplomacy, tying clans together when swords were too risky. You glance at the chief's portion, that untouched venison still sitting pretty, and wonder if it's a gift to the spirits or just the hound's dinner. The hall's buzzing again, with whispers about who gave what and what it means. You're catching snippets, someone saying the dagger's hilt was stolen, not crafted, and you're hoping that's just gossip. You lean back, the bench creaking, and sip your ale, the firelight warm on your face. The gifts are piling up cloth weapons, even a tiny carved boat, and each one's a thread in this messy clan tapestry. You're tired, your head swimming with names and grudges, but you're hooked, waiting for the next offering to tip the balance. For now, you're just a witness, caught in the feast's wild woven heart. You're still deep in the Highland feast, the hall a swirling haze of firelight, ale fumes, and the low hum of bagpipes. Yep, that goose is never coming back. The gift-giving's wrapped up, leaving a pile of furze blades and that mysterious goose feather by the high table, but the feast's energy hasn't faded. Now you're watching something new unfold, feud settling. The clan's using this food-fueled moment to hash out old grudges, and it's less, let's talk it out, and more, let's eat together, and maybe not stab anyone. You're on your bench wedged between Big Hamish, who's picking venison from his teeth, and the kid who's awake again and flicking bannock crumbs. You're trying to stay invisible because the air's thick with tension, and one wrong word could turn this feast into a brawl. The chief stands his shadow, looming across the hall, and calls for silence. He's holding that dagger from the gift-giving, the one with the rival clan's colors, and you're remembering Hamish's whisper about stolen sheep. Historically, feasts in 14th century Scotland were prime time for settling disputes, especially after the power vacuum left by the Wars of Independence. Food and ale softened tempers, making it easier to broker peace or at least delay a raid. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believed sharing a specific dish like bannocks, broken from the same loaf, bound both sides to a truce, at least until the next moon. Historians still argue whether this was about honor or just a way to get everyone too full to fight. You're watching as the chief gestures to a rival laird, the one with the lightning bolt scar from your serving days. They each take a bannock bracket and eat the hall so quiet you can hear the fire crackle. It's dramatic, like a scene from a saga, and you're half expecting them to hug or draw swords. Here's a joke. Why's a clan truce like their broth? Both are warm, messy, and nobody's sure what's in it. You bite your lip to keep from chuckling, because Hamish's elbow is close, and it's got a mean swing. The feud's about those sheep surprise, and you're piecing together that Black Rory's clan swiped them last spring. The chief's voice is steady, laying out terms. Rory's clan returns 2 cows, and the matter's settled. The scarred laird nods grudgingly, and you're amazed this is working. You're handed a horn of ale to pass, and you sip bad form, but you're nervous. The custom's odd. Both leaders drink from the same horn passed by a neutral guest, and you're praying it's not you. Luckily, Morag steps up her glare, daring anyone to object, and the horn makes its rounds without a fight. You're starting to see the feast's magic. The food, the toasts, even that crab apple you're still tasting, they're tools easing old wounds. The fringe detail hits when another dispute comes up, this time over a border stream. 2 clansmen, red-faced from ale, are shouting until a woman, maybe the one with the tartan blanket, sets a bowl of fish between them. The rule: they have to eat together, head-first trout, and all to share the river's gift. They grumble, but dig in, and the hall laughs, tension melting like tallow. You're wondering if the river spirits are real, because this feels like a miracle. Another feud's quieter, settled over a shared bannock at a side table. You catch snippets: a stolen horse, a broken fence, and someone named Red Eye yep, from that guest list mess. They're not shouting, just talking, their knives safely sheathed. The mainstream fact sinks in. These moments were why feasts mattered, turning enemies into table mates, if only for a night. You glance at the chief's portion, still untouched, and wonder if it's a peace offering to the spirits keeping this hall intact. You're roped into passing a platter of crab apples, and you toss one to a clansman who looks like he'd rather toss it back at your head. The rule here's to smile when you share, to sweeten the deal, and you're grinning so hard your face hurts. Another joke: why do clans settle feuds over food? Because it's hard to swing a sword when you're stuffed with bannocks. The table chuckles, and you're feeling bold until Hamish's glare says to quit while you're ahead. The hall's buzzing again with laughter and the clink of horns, but it's softer now, like the clans exhaled a collective grudge. You're catching whispers of other disputes: land honor a missing goat, but they're being handled one bowl at a time. You're starting to feel the feast's rhythm, a dance of food and forgiveness that's messy but alive. The firelight weaves shadows across the walls, and you're sinking into the moment, the ale and warmth pulling you deeper. You lean back the bench, creaking, and nibble a bannock crumb from your tunic. The chief's still at the high table, watching like a hawk, and you're betting he's counting every truce. You're tired, your head heavy, but there's a glow here, a sense of something mended, even if it's fragile. For now, you're just a witness caught in the feast's wild, healing heart. You're still nestled in the Highland feast, the hall a warm blur of firelight, and the lingering buzz of ale with the bagpipes humming like a distant lullaby. Rest in peace, goose. The feud settling has eased the tension, leaving the clan looser, their laughter softer, like a storm that's blown itself out. You're on your bench. Big Hamish, now dozing, with his head on the table, and the kids back to flicking crumbs, but you're too tired to care. Now you're noticing something new. The women of the clan who've been in the background all night stirring pots, passing platters, are stepping into the spotlight in subtle, powerful ways. You're watching their quiet influence, a hidden current steering this feast, and it's like spotting a secret code in the chaos. You catch Morag, the onion-scented guest list queen, whispering to the chief's wife at the high table. Her hands move quick, adjusting a tartan shawl, but her words are sharper, and the wife nods her eyes, flicking to a rival laird. Historically, women in 14th century Scottish clans wielded influence behind the scenes, especially at feasts where they shaped alliances and cooled tempers after events like the Bruce's campaigns. They weren't at the high table, but their voices carried. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believed a woman had to bless the ale barrels before serving, or the drink would turn sour in the heart. You're picturing Morag muttering over those barrels you hauled, and it explains her grumpy vibe. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual, or just women claiming control in a man's world. You're handed a bannock by a woman with flour-dusted hands, maybe the one who called you a Sassenach during setup. She smiles, and it's not just polite. It's like she's saying, "You're welcome here, but don't mess up." You nibble the crust, flaking onto your tunic, and notice she's passing bannocks to specific guests, her choices deliberate. Here's a joke. Why is a clan woman's bannock like a secret weapon? Because it's warm, comforting, and lands exactly where she aims. You smirk, but keep it quiet. Her sharp eyes are on you, and you're not testing her. You're starting to spot patterns. A young woman, maybe Fiona, from your foraging days, is refilling ale horns, but she lingers by certain clansmen, her laughter easing their scowls. You're remembering that stream dispute settled over fish. She was the one who placed the bowl, her hands steady, as she nudged peace along. The custom's subtle women often served as peace weavers, using food and drink to smooth over grudges. You watch her pour ale for the scarred laird, her banter light, but calculated, and his tight smile softens. It's like she's conducting the feast without anyone noticing. The fringe detail comes when you see an older woman, her hair silver and braided, quietly rearranging crab apples on a table. The rule, she's placing them in pairs to balance the clan's luck, and nobody questions her. It's a small act, but the clansmen nearby lower their voices, like she's weaving magic into the fruit. You're wondering if she's the one who blessed those bannocks you ground oats for back when Angus was grumbling. You're tempted to ask, but her calm authority says, "Don't interrupt." You're roped into helping clear empty bowls, and a woman, maybe the tartan blanket giver, guides you her instructions, soft but firm. She's directing which bowls go where, ensuring rival clansmen don't end up sharing leftovers. It's a small move, but it keeps the peace, and you're starting to see how women are the feast's backbone. The mainstream fact hits you. Women manage the logistics, food seating, even those heather garlands you hung with Elspeth, making feasts possible in a world of scarce resources. You're back on your bench, a fresh ale horn in hand, and you sip the warmth spreading. Another woman singing, now a low lullaby, about a mother who outwitted a raider. The men listen, their heads bowed, and you're feeling the weight of her voice like it's stitching the clan together. Another joke. Why's a clan woman's song like their broth? Both sneak up on you and make you feel at home. You smile, but you're quiet, letting the melody sink in. You're catching more glimpses. Women adjusting tartans, passing whispers, even shooing the chief's hound from the chief's portion still untouched by the high table. They're everywhere, their influence a thread in this tartan of a feast. You're remembering Mary's kitchen, her iron grip on the pots, and how she made that glue-like porridge taste like victory. The hall's alive, but it's their hands, keeping it steady, their voices softening the edges. You lean back, the bench, creaking the firelight, dancing on the walls. The feast feels different now, layered with quiet strength you didn't see before. You're tired, your hands sticky with ale and crumbs, but there's a warmth here, a sense of balance you're only starting to understand. For now, you're just a guest, watching the women weave their magic one bannock at a time. You're still in the Highland Hall, the feast's energy now, a warm hum like embers settling after a blaze. The bagpipes are softer. Maybe the goose is finally at peace, and the firelight casts lazy shadows across the rush-strewn floor. Big Hamish is snoring his face half buried in bannock crumbs, and the kids curled up dreaming of spoon carvings. You're nursing a horn of ale, its bitterness fading into comfort, and you're starting to notice the feast's stranger edges, superstitions, and omens. The clans weaving rituals into every bite and toast, believing these acts protect the night from unseen forces. You're watching, half amused, half spooked, as these eerie customs unfold, each one a thread, tying the clan to something older than the hall itself. You spot Morag, the guest list tyrant, sprinkling a pinch of salt into the fire. Her lips move, muttering something you can't catch, and the flames flare briefly, casting her shadow like a giant's. Historically, superstitions were rampant in 14th century Scotland, especially at feasts where clans used rituals to ward off misfortune after turbulent times like the Bruce's Wars. Saltfire and whispered charms were shields against spirits or rival curses. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believed the fire had to burn a specific wood rowan for protection, or the feast would invite bad luck. You're eyeing the logs, wondering if they're rowan, and hoping nobody skimped. Historians still argue whether these rituals were pagan holdovers or Christianized for the church's sake. You're handed a bannock when do these stop coming, and told to eat it whole, no crumbs to keep the spirits fed. You chew carefully, the crust catching in your throat, and glance at the kid's crumb-strewn lap, wondering if he's doomed us all. Here's a joke. Why's a clan superstition like their ale? Both make you nervous, but you keep swallowing. You smirk, but you're quick to brush crumbs off your tunic, just in case Morag's watching with that curse-spotting squint of hers. You notice a new ritual. A woman may be the silver-haired crabapple arranger, circling the hall with a sprig of heather. She touches each table, her movements slow, like she's painting invisible wards. The custom's eerie heather, tied to the clan's land, is thought to bind the hall's luck, keeping out whatever lurks in the dark. You're remembering those prickly garlands you hung with Elspeth, and now they feel less decorative, more like a shield. You're tempted to touch the heather on your table, but the woman's calm authority says, "Don't meddle." You're roped into another ritual, this one, involving the chief's portion, that untouched venison, still sitting pretty by the high table. You're told to carry a candle lit from that same flint you used ages ago and place it near the meat to honor the hunt's spirit. The candle's tallow drips hot on your fingers, and you're moving slow, aware of every eye on you. The fringe detail hits. Some clans believe the candle's flame had to stay steady, or the next hunt would fail. Your flame wobbles, and you're holding your breath, praying you're not jinxing the clan's deer supply. You set the candle down the flame miraculously intact, and step back, your heart pounding. The chief nods, and you're feeling like you've passed a test, even if you're not sure what for. Another joke. Why is a clan ritual like a bad dance, one wrong step, and everyone's tripping over you? You chuckle under your breath, but you're keeping your hands, still avoiding any sudden moves that might offend the spirits or Morag. You're starting to feel the weight of these beliefs. The hall's alive, but it's fragile, like a thread stretched tight. The mainstream fact sinks in. Superstitions gave clans control in a brutal world where a bad harvest or a raid could end them. You glance at the chief's portion, now glowing in candlelight, and wonder if it's less for the hound and more for whatever's watching from the shadows. You're remembering that odd-numbered trout rule from the kitchen, and now it feels less quirky, more like a plea for safety. You're handed a horn of ale, and the rules to spill a drop on the floor before drinking for the earth. You tilt the horn, a bead of ale hitting the rushes, and sip the act, grounding you in the clan's world. You catch a clansman tying a red thread around his spoon, muttering about keeping the night kind. It's small, but it's everywhere. Salt heather candles, threads each a knot in the clan's protective web. The hall's softer now, the laughter quieter, the fire's glow wrapping you like a blanket. You're tired, your hands sticky with tallow and ale, but there's a strange calm in these rituals, a sense of being held by something bigger. You lean back the bench creaking and watch the shadows dance, wondering what else this night believes in. For now, you're just a guest caught in the feast's whispered spells. You're still in the Highland Hall, but the feast's wild pulse is fading, like a fire sinking into coals. The bagpipes are barely a murmur now. Guess the goose finally won, and the air's heavy with the scent of spilled ale-roasted meat and damp rushes. Big Hamish is out cold snoring, loud enough to wake the spirits, and the kid sprawled across the bench, his crumb-flicking days done. You're bone-tired, your tunic a mess of broth stains and heather scratches, and the feast is winding down. Now comes the aftermath cleanup. This isn't just sweeping up. It's a chaotic communal effort to tame the wreckage of a clan's big night. You're hauling bowls, dodging puddles, and learning the peculiar rules that govern even this messy end. You're handed a broom. Yep, another heather twig special, like the one you swept with before the chaos began. The floor's a battlefield of bones, apple cores, and what you hope is just mud. Historically, cleaning up after 14th century Scottish feasts was a group task reflecting the clan's shared survival ethos, especially in lean times after events like the 1315 famine. Every scrap was saved bones for broth crumbs for pigs, because waste was a sin in the Highlands. The quirky tidbit: some clans believed the rushes had to be burned at dawn, not swept out to cleanse the night's sins. You're eyeing the pile you're sweeping and hoping nobody's got a torch yet. Historians still argue whether this was about hygiene or appeasing whatever spirits got rowdy during the toasts. You're sweeping your arms, aching, when Morag grabs your elbow and points to a stack of bowls. Stack 'em, don't break 'em. She snaps her voice hoarse from ale or yelling or both. You start piling the wooden bowls, their carved stags, and thistles slick with grease. Here's a joke: why's clan cleanup like their feuds? Both leave you picking up someone else's mess. You smirk, but you're quick to steady a wobbling bowl before Morag's glare turns you to stone. You're sent to gather leftovers, which means scraping half-eaten bannocks and fish heads into a sack. The rule's odd. Anything touched by the chief's hand, like that bannock he broke during the feud. Settling gets set aside for the poor, not the pigs. You're careful, remembering that left-hand blessing from way back and tuck those scraps into a separate basket. The hall's quieter now, just the clatter of bowls and the occasional groan from a clansman who drank one horn too many. You spot Fiona, your foraging pal, hauling a barrel, her braid swinging like she's still got energy to burn. You're jealous because you're running on fumes. The fringe detail hits when you're told to pour spilled ale into a clay jug, not the floor. It's not for drinking, thank the spirits, but for offering to the land. You're sloshing ale from tables, your hands sticky, and wondering if the land's as hungover as you feel. You're picturing that red-threaded goose feather from the gift-giving, and this feels like another knot in the clan's web of beliefs. You pour carefully, avoiding a puddle where someone, probably Hamish, missed the mark. You're roped into dragging benches back to the walls, your back screaming as you heave the heavy oak. The custom here's to leave the hall open, no tables blocking the center to welcome the next gathering. You're not sure if it's practical or another spirit thing, but you push your boots slipping on the rushes. Another joke, why's clan cleanup like their songs? Both take forever, and nobody knows all the rules. You chuckle, but a clansman's grunt says to keep moving. You're sent outside to dump bones into a pit, the night air so cold it slaps you awake. The stars are sharp, the loch glinting like a mirror, and you're almost sorry to go back inside. The pit's already half full, and you're tossing in trout spines and venison scraps your hands numb. The mainstream fact sinks in. These scraps weren't trash. They were resources boiled into soups or fed to animals tying the feast to the clan's survival. You're remembering that barley you counted with the granary's grumpy old man, and now you see why every grain mattered. Back in the hall, you're helping gather candles, their tallow stubs still warm. The rule's to save them, not toss them, because fat's too precious to waste. You're stacking stubs, your fingers waxy, and catching glimpses of the chief's portion. Yep, still untouched, though the hound's circling like it's ready to claim its prize. You're wondering if that candle you placed for the hunt spirit made a difference, or if the spirits are just laughing at your sweaty effort. The hall's nearly empty now, just a few stragglers sweeping or hauling barrels. You're exhausted, your body begging for a nap, but there's a strange pride in seeing the chaos tamed. The fire's low, the shadows soft, and the hall feels different, cleaner, but still heavy with the night stories. You lean against a wall, the stone cool, and watch the last rushes get swept away, wondering how this place will look at dawn. You're still in the Highland Hall, the feast's echoes, fading like a dream you're trying to hold on to. The cleanup's mostly done. The rushes swept the bowls, stacked, and the air's lighter tinged with the faint smoky sweetness of dying embers. Big Hamish is gone, probably snoring in a barn somewhere, and the kid's been carted off, leaving his crumb-strewn legacy behind. The bagpipes are silent, thank the spirits, and the hall feels vast, its stone walls cradling the quiet. You're slumped against a bench, your hands gritty with wax and ale reflecting on the feast's legacy, not just tonight's chaos, but what it means for the clan's future. These gatherings are more than food and fights. They're the threads that weave a clan's story, and you're starting to feel their weight. You look around the hall now, bare, except for a few flickering candles, and that chief's portion still untouched, glowing faintly by the high table. Historically, feasts like this were the backbone of 14th century Scottish clans, forging bonds that held firm through wars and winters, especially after the power shifts of Robert the Bruce's era. They weren't just parties. They were survival, tying families to their land and each other. The quirky tidbit. Some clans believe the feast's success, measured by laughter, not spilled blood, predicted the year's harvest. You're hoping tonight's raucous night means full granaries, though you're not sure Hamish's snoring counts as laughter. Historians still argue whether this was folklore or a way to keep everyone invested in the next feast. You're thinking back to the guest list. You helped Morag wrestle those names and squiggles that shaped the night. Each guest, from the scarred laird to Red Eye Ain, was a knot in the clan's web, their presence a promise or a threat for tomorrow. You're remembering the bannocks you ground oats for the ale you poured, the stories that filled the air like smoke. Here's a joke. Why's a clan feast like a good story? Both leave you full tired and wondering what's next. You smile, but it's soft, your energy spent. You notice the chief's wife, her tartan shawl, catching the candlelight, speaking quietly to a young clansman. She's passing on instructions, maybe about those cows, from the feud settling, and you're seeing her as the feast's quiet architect like Morag and Fiona, and the silver-haired woman with her crab apples. Their influence lingers, a legacy of balance that'll outlast the ale stains. You're starting to understand that the feast's true power isn't in the food or the toasts, but in the connections it weaves. Grudges eased, alliances born, stories told. The fringe detail hits when you spot a single heather sprig left on a table, its purple fading. You're remembering the woman who circled the hall, touching tables to bind the luck. And now, you wonder if this sprig's a leftover charm, a final nod to the spirits. You don't touch it too many superstitions tonight, but you feel its presence like the clan's heartbeat. You're picturing that rowan wood in the fire, the salt Morag tossed, and the candle you set by the chief's portion, all part of a ritual that's bigger than you. You're handed a final task: carry a basket of leftover bannocks to the hall's door, where they'll be given to stragglers or the poor. The rules to whisper for the land as you set them down, and you do your voice, barely a breath. It's a small act, but it ties you to the clan's cycle. Food, shared debts, paid spirits honored. The mainstream fact sinks in. Feasts like this were investments building trust that kept clans strong when raiders or hunger came. You're thinking of the barley. You counted the trout you caught, each piece a brick in the clan's foundation. You lean against the wall, the stone cool against your back, and watch the last clansman drift out. The hall's empty now, but it's not lifeless. It's waiting ready for the next gathering. You're tired, your body heavy, but there's a glow in your chest, a sense of having been part of something that'll echo beyond tonight. Another joke. Why's a clan feast like a star? It burns bright, then lingers in the dark. You're too worn to laugh, but it fits this night, a light in the clan's long story. You glance at the chief's portion, one last time, the hound finally claiming it, his jaws snapping softly. The candles are stubs now, their flames small but steady, and you're feeling the feast's legacy settle around you, a warmth that's more than firelight. You're ready to let the night go, to let the hall rest its stones, holding the memory of every toast, every truce, every song. You're easing into the quiet now, the hall's shadows softening, wrapping you like a worn blanket. The air's still, the scent of peat and heather, fading into something gentler, like a sigh from the land itself. You're letting go, your breath slow, each exhale carrying away the night's weight, the clatter of bulls, the sting of ale, the pulse of stories. The clan's safe, their bonds tighter, their spirits calm, and you're part of that, a fleeting guest in their endless weave. Picture the loch outside its surface, smooth under starlight, rippling only when a fish dares to dream. You're sinking the world, growing distant, the hall's stones whispering you to rest. Let the feast fade, let the candles dim, let your thoughts drift like smoke on a highland breeze. Sleep's calling soft as a bard's last note, and you're ready to answer, wrapped in the clan's quiet heart. Good night.